All right. Well, welcome. This is the Planning Commission's meeting of August 5th. Start with roll call.
Chair Pevsner.
Here.
Vice Chair Dennison.
Here.
Commissioners Dellis.
Here.
Hutt.
Here.
And Spears.
Present.
Excellent. Okay. Approval of the agenda.
I have a question on the agenda before we approve. We have a presentation on two things tonight, and I just want to understand what we're doing in that. We're not going to have any discussion, right? We're just going to have stuff presented to us?
We wanted to provide an update to the Planning Commission regarding the status of both the housing element as well as the Meadows proposed project. So there's really will be no discussion item on that tonight.
Okay, but are we are going to take public comment on those items?
It's up to the chair. We can take public comment, and we will possibly answer questions as well.
And we're also happy to answer questions from the commissioners, and then for members of the public, after public comment, so that there's no back and forth. After public comment, we'll be writing all the questions down, and with Chair Pevsner's permission, I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Sure.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because community input is for things that are not on the agenda. So if people can comment then, we want to comment then and not at community input. So just so we know ahead of time. That's why I was asking that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to probably let.
We also have public speaker cards at the back of the room. We did also attach an information regarding decorum for the meetings proceeding forward. So if you have speaker cards, it looks like we do have a number of people here. We would appreciate if you could fill those out, hand them to the recording secretary, Jen Peterson, and she will read out the names in the order that they are received.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions about the? Go ahead.
No, I make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Okay, passes. Okay, now the report from our closed session. City Attorney?
The Planning Commission met in closed session under Government Code Section 54957 regarding threats to public services or facilities. No reportable action was taken.
Thank you. All right, now we'll move on to the approval of the minutes, July 15th. And I think I missed that meeting, so, right? I don't think I was here, or was I? I can't remember. We were on Zoom, so it's hard for me to remember. But if I was, I'll.
You were here.
I was? Okay, then I'll look at it. All right, go ahead.
I didn't have any changes, so I'll make a motion that we accept as presented.
I'll second that.
Second. All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimous.
Abstention.
Huh?
Ask for abstentions.
Oh, any abstentions? Was somebody not here?
Yeah.
Oh, John, yeah, that's right.
I'll
You were
abstain.
here.
And I think Bob too.
Okay.
John and I were not there, so we're abstaining.
Yeah, when you're on Zoom, I can't really tell, you know?
Okay.
So, all right. Let's see. Oh, council liaison report.
Yes, good evening. So the one thing I'll talk about here is that the discussion item that you've got on accessory dwelling units came before the City Council on the 13th. I assume staff will give a similar presentation to it, so I'll be happy when we get to that item to fill in anything that happened in the dialogue of the meeting there.
Okay.
So there was a fair amount of discussion on it and some guidance to the commission, and happy to help fill things in based on my notes from the meeting and my presence there.
Perfect. Sounds good. All right. That moves on to community input. This is the time members of the public are encouraged to participate in the meeting by providing public comments. There are two opportunities tonight. The first is now, which is to speak about items that are not on the current agenda. And then later during the discussion items, I'll let the public make comment during then. So don't break up anything that's on the current agenda. Try and limit your comments to 3 minutes if possible. And then you know about the comment cards that we have available as well. All right. Anybody want to speak on something that's not on tonight's agenda? All right. Excellent. Moving on, then we will move on to our presentation of the housing element update.
Thank you, Chair Pevsner. We do have a PowerPoint presentation for you this evening, so you may want to adjust your seating. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of the procedural steps for adoption of the six-cycle housing element update, the agencies involved, and opportunities for engagement. So the six-cycle housing element is operating currently at an 8-year cycle. And basically, in terms of the procedures and the oversight of this process, I wanted to go through this circular flow chart, which begins at the top right corner. HCD sets RENA. So the Housing and Community Development Department, or HCD, is the state department that determines the allocation of housing units for the Southern California region, which consists of Ventura, Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. HCD has determined that this six-cycle housing element must accommodate a total distribution of 1.34 million housing units across the SCAG region. And SCAG is the regional housing planning agency who distributes that allocation of units to all of our jurisdictions within the subregion. And SCAG has determined that the regional housing needs allocation for the city of Sierra Madre will be 204 units. In compliance with this directive, staff, along with our housing consultant, updated the housing element, analyzed housing need, prepared a site inventory analysis, and identified governmental constraints and pro-housing programs and requirements. Currently, the plan is being reviewed by HCD during the 60-day period, where we have actually had a couple of meetings with HCD on Zoom to provide their feedback and respond to some of their questions. And hopefully what we'll do is we'll try to address many of those questions that HCD have prior to releasing the final document. So the city is currently is publishing the draft EIR, and it's on the, we will be publishing within a 45-day public comment period once that is up and running. The city then will hold public hearings before the Planning Commission, the City Council, who will certify the final EIR and approve the final housing element. At that point, we submit that to HCD for a 90-day review and approval of the final housing element. In each step of the process, there is allowance for public engagement. This particular timeline is looking at the meetings that we've held to date. Thus far, we have held 3 city council meetings. We've held a webinar with the congregations, faith-based organizations regarding congregational affordable housing. And we've also met with the majority of them individually on their site and walked the site with them with our consultants as well. On December 1st, we held a virtual community workshop with the community. And we have been before the Planning Commission on this topic. This is the 3rd time this evening. And as I mentioned, the scoping meeting has been released. We held a scoping meeting as well on July 28th on this very topic. There are a number of upcoming meetings that are planned. So we are in the current 49-day public comment period from August 3rd through September 21st. You can submit written comments directly to our email address that's included in our webpage. And those comments will be included in a response to comments in the final environmental impact report. Upcoming meetings, though, will include, we have calendared 2 planning commissions and 2 city council meetings. And as you can see, the October 15th is the start date of the 6-cycle planning period, where HCD will review that finally for a 90-day period. So as I mentioned earlier, that the Southern California Association of Governments allocates the distribution of units to all jurisdictions. The second to the last row in lighter green shows the 204 units that are allocated to the city of Sierra Madre. And it is SCAG's directive as well that we provide at least a 30% buffer. So really what we're trying to capture is at least 265 units. So working with city council, our consultants, and certainly staff, we spent quite a bit of time identifying where those units might be, which we called opportunity sites. And we created this inventory. We are looking at a total site capacity of about 331 units overall. And you can see where the total, looking at multifamily opportunity sites, we identified 90 opportunities, approximately 121 units in religious housing overlay zone, and also 120 accessory dwelling units. 120 accessory dwelling units is throughout the 8-year planning cycle. And of course, they're also distributed among income level. So lower, we group both very low and low income for the purposes of this presentation. And you can see the moderate distribution and above moderate. So the housing element opportunity sites, we identified 4 particular sites. They're numbered 1 through 4. Site number 1 is really located adjacent to City Hall, the City Hall parking lot. And it's the series of properties that we see here along Mariposa Avenue. Site number 2 is 80 Baldwin Avenue, which is right down here and along Suffolk Avenue. So we've actually, one project is pending construction, and is also, we've heard from other property owners that are looking at lot consolidation opportunities and expressed interest in developing some of those sites for higher densities. Site number 3 is at the terminus of Park Avenue, as it has a T intersection onto Sierra Madre Boulevard. We've spoken to that property owner as well, and they're also interested in increasing density and either building additional units on site, or there's always the opportunity for higher densities to redevelop the entire site. And site 4 is over here at Lowell and North Baldwin Avenue. That particular property owner recently purchased the property and is also interested in redeveloping that property at higher density. The other 4 sites, which are lettered A, B, C, and D, are the faith-based organizations, St. Rita Catholic Church, United Methodist Church, Old North Church, which is right there, the northern portion of their campus that's outside of Measure V, and Bethany Church and School. And, so, as I said, we've met with the majority, the 3 of them on site, walked the site. We're able to discuss some of the plans and what their desires and how affordable housing might fit into their mission, whether it be family housing or senior housing. So this presentation, as I mentioned, was given to the City Council and for information purposes only. And if you have any questions of staff, we can answer those at this point.
I just wanted, for clarification purposes, the EIR that is referenced in here is an EIR strictly on the housing element. It's not an EIR that has to do with any other properties, such as the Meadows.
No, it's specific to the housing element only.
And the, this information that you're telling us about now is already been talked to HCD about? And the EIR that's out incorporates HCD comments?
The EIR does not incorporate HCD comments as of yet. They're reviewing, they're providing comment on the housing element itself, the draft housing element. We've had 2 meetings with them over Zoom. They had a list of questions that they were asking us and our consultant, and we were addressing many of those. And some of those were eliminated, others we needed to go back and investigate further or add additional verbiage to some of the text that they wanted to have elaborated upon.
So when we have our meetings, was it September, October, we'll have HCD's comments by then?
Yes, they'll be included in the draft.
Okay,
the
that's great.
updated draft.
So will we be able to see like the version of the housing element that went to HCD and then the version that's been revised so we can understand what HCD's
I think what we
concerns
can
were?
do is consolidate their red line comments as an independent document, so if we can compare it that way.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Any other questions?
None from me. Bob? No? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for public comment. Anybody in the audience want to make comments about this particular item? Sure. Please, just state your name and approximate address for the record.
Yes, my name is Tricia Searcy. I live at 734 Fairview Avenue in Sierra Madre. I've lived there for about 22 years. And my concern about the housing element is that my understanding is what was sent up to the state was a document that characterized the Meadows project as a pending residential project. And my understanding is that project, under our current laws, cannot be built. They don't have a right to build that property under current zoning laws and our general plan. So that's a concern. And then the other concern that I have is that as we're trying to meet these RENA requirements, I watched the meeting about the congregational overlay. And then at the city council, no, it's a planning commission meeting, I think, I asked questions of Mr. Gonzalez and of Karen, blanking on her last name, the consultant,
Warner?
as to why the monastery wasn't included in this congregational overlay. We're asking the little churches with little parking lots to do this, and the monastery we're not asking. And so this has me questioning the priorities of the city and the planning commission, because we have a need for senior housing, we have a need for affordable housing. We don't have a need for 42 new residential homes that are going to be in the $1 million range. So I'm really unclear as to why these choices are being made, why we're choosing to grant exceptions to our laws to a developer to build this gigantic residential development, and at the same time not requiring them to do anything about our affordable housing issue. The answer that I got the other day was that they weren't considered because they expressed no interest. Well, that's all well and good, but if they have the last available space in Sierra Madre and they want to build something there, I think it would be should be considered that they be asked to contribute to a need. Otherwise, why should we grant an exemption to our laws for them?
Thank you.
That's my question.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Whatever he gets. Is that
Good?
I'm trying to get the timer up.
Chair Pevsner, if you'd like, I can keep time until we get the timer up.
Yeah, that's okay. That sounds fine. 3 minutes. You can yeah, just work on the side, Claire. Go ahead and begin. We'll
Right.
time you.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Alex Arietta, live at 645 Edgeview here in Sierra Madre. Also wanted to question, in terms of the monastery, in terms of why they are not being included in terms of the overlay and in terms of affordable housing, the senior level housing. They're the single biggest property owner in the city. And it seems quite ludicrous that they would not be included in this, and don't understand that. And I think as we kind of hear about the project, the Meadows project, I think it's going to be critical for the Planning Commission to, understand that at a nuanced level and ask the hard questions. Because when this was first presented last week at the City Council meeting, no one got that. No one understood in terms of why the monastery isn't being included in the housing element numbers for a number of reasons. And so I want to get that out there. It is a serious concern I have. I think it's a broader concern that the community has as they learn more about the housing element and about the Meadows project. And I think the other thing that kind of compounds this is these series of meetings between last week and today are really the first round of truly public meetings that the Council, Planning Commission are having in the last 15 months. And I think that's a really important point that the Planning Commission and City Council have to consider, that for the first time, really, in 15 months, the public is able to come together in an open forum and learn about this. And on some level, from a number of people I've spoken to, the impression is that this has moved along very, very quickly in terms of the Meadows project, in terms of the draft EIR, and so forth, and also the housing element. And I think there were also some questions last week that came up around the housing element in terms of it having been submitted to HCD prior to City Council having reviewed it, and was questioning that last week as well. Wasn't clear around that. And there was some discussion around, well, what happens if we make changes to it and we miss the deadline? And I think the city attorney spoke about some of those ramifications. But I think the concern, the broader concern, was let's do the right thing for the residents. And if we miss a deadline, we miss a deadline. If there's some other ramifications, let's do the right thing by the residents of Sierra Madre. So those are the key points I wanted to talk about as it pertains to the housing element, and just important considerations that I think it's important for the Planning Commission to be cognizant about in terms of what the current sentiment is around the lack of opportunities like tonight, which is great, but it hasn't been forthcoming for the last 15 months. So there's a bit of catch up that community residents feel like they are doing at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
David Beach, and I'm a resident here. Couple things similar to what the first two people mentioned. In the presentation to the City Council last week, the description of the properties that are eligible or being considered for the low-income affordable housing includes a number of commercial areas. And at the same time, the City Council was talking about, gee, we really need to support our local businesses. And to the point that the first two speakers made, why isn't the Meadows being considered for low-income affordable housing, and taking away commercial properties and businesses here that support the city with sales tax, people going to these businesses, and their livelihood that would be damaged by having to move. And I think you also mentioned some of the possible sites being some of the church parking lots, if I recall correctly. We already now have, and I think it's terrific, people going to church, but we have people parking all over the neighborhoods for our churches. And now we're thinking about taking away their parking lots and leaving, $3 and $4 million homes that don't fit in our town. I think that's something that really needs to be considered, and the impact on the existing residents of this city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. One of the problems I'm having is I'm having a hard time hearing a lot of what's going on. Okay, so it's not just me. I'm wondering maybe you could click the volume up a little bit between the masks we have to wear and sometimes the lower voice. I'm only hearing one word out of maybe 10. So, okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Maybe we'll move on to the Meadows and Bailey Canyon project, since these seems to all be related to that. Presentation?
Yes, our next item is a PowerPoint presentation, and it will be delivered by our city attorney.
Thank you, Director Gonzalez, but if we don't have the presentation up, I will be unable to present.
Has his arm.
Well, while we're waiting for that, one of the things that one of the speakers said was that we were taking commercial spaces out for the housing element, and I think that was discussed a long time ago, but my understanding is the plan that was presented to HCD and as currently stated doesn't take any commercial space over to housing.
That's correct.
Oh, they can't hear you. Sorry.
Are these on?
You gotta
They're on.
Okay. Yeah. So what I was saying before was that there was discussion of using commercial space for housing at some point, but that was decided not to happen. So the current plan has no commercial space coming out for housing. All the housing opportunity sites are outside of the commercial zone.
Yeah, I think everybody's behaving.
Looks like our projector is not going on.
Maybe it needs batteries.
No,
Yes.
it's not that. It's hardwired.
Yeah, it's.
Huh.
Here it goes.
There it goes.
Yes. Right.
It's because I was playing with the batteries in the back,
Ah.
but it went off again.
No, I can see the light in the front is on. It's warming up.
Yes, double A.
If this didn't work, those screens would still work.
Those screens should work.
Yeah, we can all see those screens.
Yeah.
And then Bob doesn't have to move.
Or me. It's 'cause it's there we go. Got it.
Okay, there we are. Can you hear me in the back? Perfect. So my name is Alex Girgosian. I'm the city attorney, and today's presentation is titled The Meadows Project: Procedural Steps and Opportunities for Public Engagement. So the reason for this presentation is twofold. First, we thought that it's an appropriate time now because the process legally is about to begin in terms of the public hearings and the EIR and all that. And second, the city's been receiving a number of emails and has heard a number of comments demonstrating some misunderstandings about the process and the opportunities for public engagement. So we wanted to clarify that at this meeting. What we're not doing is, obviously, city staff is not speaking in support or against the project. City staff is neutral in this. And second, we're not addressing any substantive aspects of the project. So I won't be talking about like the specific plan or the environmental impact report. I'm just going to stick to the process and the procedures involved in processing this application moving forward. Next slide. Thanks. So a question arose in the emails: why is the housing element being considered at the Meadows alongside the Meadows project? Are they somehow related? The answer is no, they're not related, and the city actually doesn't control the timing of either. The housing element, the timing for that is set by state law. So like Director Gonzalez mentioned, every 8 years this has to be updated, and then that process begins once we receive the housing allocation from the regional body, which is Southern California Association of Governments. Once we get that allocation, then we begin the process of determining where those houses need to go, what needs to be zoned, and drafting that housing element that is currently before the Department of Housing and Community Development. For the Meadows project, that process begins once an application is submitted. Obviously, the city doesn't control when development applications are submitted. Developers or applicants choose that when to submit it. And once it's submitted, we're bound by law to process that application. And the rate at which we process it depends on how quickly the applicant can put together a complete application. The fact that this happened during COVID, I think some people raised in the emails, they raised a concern saying the city did this during COVID. The city did not do this during COVID. The city doesn't control COVID, nor does it control when applications are submitted. For the Meadows project, so like I said, the city has to consider the application. So I remember at the last meeting we had at the city council, some folks were upset that the city council is even considering this. I just want to note that the city council and the planning commission must consider this application. It needs to go through the process. Whether or not the city council chooses or the planning commission recommends changing the zone or adopting the development agreement or adopting the specific plan, that's a decision for this body and for the city council. But it must go through the process because the application has been submitted. Next slide. So limits on prohibiting housing throughout the city. So as we mentioned, the city can't adopt a policy that limits housing throughout the city. There can be no anti-growth, anti-development policy adopted by the city. As stated, we have to accommodate up to 204 units because that's our RENA allocation. In addition, Senate Bill 330 limits our ability to limit housing. So the one I refer to most because I get the most emails about it is imposing a development moratorium. Often people refer to this as the water moratorium that existed. Currently, as state law stands now, the city cannot impose a water moratorium unless A, it receives approval from the state, and B, and related, in order to receive that approval from the state, we need to demonstrate to the state that there's actually a shortage in supply of water, either currently or forecast. We cannot make that showing as it stands today. According to our water utility director, our supplies actually exceed our demand in the city, and they're projected to exceed demand in the coming years. Limits on prohibiting development at the monastery, that's the green box. So I know people had submitted emails saying, why doesn't the monastery do some kind of different development, whether that be senior housing or that be a school or whatever it may be. And they asked the city, why don't you make them do it? The city cannot make a developer submit any kind of application. All the city can do is, the city can make a recommendation, of course, but the type of application, the type of development that's being proposed is solely within the discretion of the applicant. Limitations on the California Environmental Quality Act. So as we mentioned earlier, the California Environmental Quality Act, an EIR is being developed for the draft EIR is currently in circulation for the Madre de la Rosa project, the Meadows project. And just so people understand the limits of that document will identify significant environmental impacts. And the developer is going to be required to mitigate those significant environmental impacts per the EIR. But the city can't simply, and neither can the Planning Commission, simply deny or refuse to grant certification to the EIR simply because there are environmental impacts. To the extent they can be mitigated, we need to seek mitigation. And if the mitigation won't solve it, then they can consider not certifying the EIR. Limitations on prohibiting all development. My only point is this. When the application comes before the Planning Commission absolutely has the right to either recommend the zone change or to recommend not changing the zone. However, I don't want people to think that the monastery doesn't have a right to develop. They have a right to develop, but it depends what they can develop. The choice here it's not simply saying no development, because that's not an option available to the city. That would be a taking under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. The options here is an institutional use more appropriate at the monastery site, or is a residential use more appropriate at the monastery site? And that's for the Planning Commission to make their recommendation and for the City Council to ultimately consider. Another note, I don't have it here on the slide, but it's come up quite a bit, so I want to clarify. Some folks think that because the planning commissioners or the City Council haven't expressed an opinion one way or another on this application, that they're somehow in favor or against it. I just want to note for the record that the city attorney has advised the Planning Commission in the past and has also advised the City Council not to state their opinion on the record yet. They have to state their opinion after the public hearings, because the law requires that they be neutral decision makers, neutral independent decision makers. That means that they cannot have taken a position before hearing all the evidence, and they won't hear all the evidence until all the public hearings are closed. And so that will happen once this item comes before the Planning Commission for their recommendation. Next slide. I know individuals have had questions about the city's transparency and responsiveness. I want to address some of those points because I think individual residents might not be aware of all the ways city staff has been trying to reach out to the residents to inform them of their opportunities to participate. The first being the transparency portal. On the city's website, there is a web page dedicated solely to this development. There is no such web page for any other development in the city. The city recognizes this as a big development, so it's created its own web page. On that web page is posted all the documents relevant to this development. I believe one of the residents recently requested that we post the development application. We just posted the development application documents that we currently have in our possession. So that's the first one. This presentation you see today will also be up on that web page. The second, responses to the Public Records Act. As of the last City Council meeting, and the number has increased since, we've responded to 8 requests for public records, which were required to produce under the California Public Records Act. And we've produced 189 documents, totaling tens of thousands of pages. And to my knowledge, the city is currently processing 3 additional PRA requests, Public Records Act requests. If you submit a Public Records Act request, we're happy to process it. You'll be hearing from the city clerk. Next, responding to community concerns. I know Director Gonzalez, myself, former City Manager Gabriel England, current interim City Manager Jose Reynoso have spent hours on the phone, in meetings with residents, via email, corresponding, to make sure that we answer as many questions as we can. Understand our time is also limited, so if we don't get back to you right away, I apologize, but we will get back to you, and if we don't, follow up. And I can assure you that to my knowledge, we've responded to every question we received. Enhanced public noticing and review. So the EIR generally is reviewed for a 45-day period, and per the city's request, the applicant has agreed to extend that period to 60 days. So there's now a 60-day review period for the EIR because we understand it's a complex document and residents may need additional time to get through it. Also, in terms of noticing, per the city's request, again, the applicant has agreed to provide notice to every single household in the city regarding the public hearings. This is unprecedented. You won't find this in any other city with any other development. But we pushed the developer for it, and he agreed. So there won't be an issue with noticing because every single resident in this city is going to receive notice of the public hearings. I know individuals were concerned about some people, I mean, not some people. People often come to the city and say, well, I've never heard of this before. This is the first time I'm hearing about it. Why is it being rushed through? I want to emphasize that it's not being rushed through. The residents have known about this at least since March 10th, 2020, right? Because that's, at that meeting, if you remember, the city council first considered the memorandum of understanding that was adopted between the city and the applicant. So that's over a year ago. We made the residents aware of this development application. On April 28th, that was adopted by the city council. On August 4th and 5th, there were community workshops. On March 9th, 2021, there was a presentation at the city council meeting. On June 14th, or July 14th, apologies, there was the EIR scoping meeting. On July 27th, there was the city council meeting where this presentation was given. And on August 5th, today, at this planning commission meeting, we're providing this presentation. There was some confusion, I think, also regarding what that memorandum of understanding was trying to achieve. So to clarify, this development is complex, and we wanted to agree with the developer on the steps for processing this development ahead of time. It also provided the city an opportunity to solicit public commitments from the developer, and that's regarding the park. If you've looked at the MOU, there's the net zero concept, the park dedication, the open space dedication, which we'll explain at a later time if folks aren't aware about that. Lastly, it provided the community an early opportunity to learn about the proposed development, because the city didn't need to engage with the developer in that MOU. But we thought at the time that it would be to the benefit of the city and to the benefit of its residents, because we'd make everything transparent and open. People know what's being contemplated, people know what's being expected of the developer, and we can move from that point forward. So before I get into the procedural steps, I wanted to clarify what these terms are that I'm going to use. So the Environmental Impact Report, or the EIR, is required under the California Environmental Quality Act when the city determines that a proposed project would have one or more significant impacts on the environment based on a preliminary review of the project. So the draft EIR is being circulated right now. People will submit their comments and questions, and all of those will be addressed in the final EIR. The general plan land use map. So the general plan is the comprehensive long-term plan for the development of the city. The general plan is at the top of the hierarchy of a local government's land use regulations. All other documents must conform to the general plan. And the general plan land use map is a part of the land use element of the general plan. The zoning code, zoning map. So the zoning code land use map, or the zoning map, divides the city into separate zones and applies different design and use regulations in each zone. The zoning code, if you don't know, is located in Title 17 of the Municipal Code, and the zoning map is just a part of the zoning code. A specific plan is a plan adopted for a particular geographic area in a jurisdiction. A specific plan is not required, but if one is adopted, the other land use approvals, like a development agreement, design review permit, tentative track map for the area, are covered and must be consistent with it. Like a zoning overlay, a specific plan establishes additional development regulations for development. A development agreement is a contract between a property owner and a local government. The benefit to the city is that the parties can contract for additional benefits that may not otherwise be secured through conditions in a permit. The benefit to the property owner is that the agreement freezes all applicable rules, regulations, policies, and fees at the time the agreement is executed. A tentative track map is required under the Subdivision Map Act to subdivide single parcels into 5 or more parcels. So here they're contemplating 42 units. In order to divide that giant piece of property into 42 units, they need a tentative track map. A design review permit is intended to ensure that an applicable project incorporates good design principles and is compatible with its neighborhood and natural surroundings. In this case, the design review permit would ensure that the individual homes are consistent with the specific plan. So instead of being consistent with the zoning code regs, it has to be consistent with the specific plan. And I believe that's all I have on this slide. So here's the final slide. There's a two-step process I want to emphasize. The two-step process is as follows, and this is what's going to come before this planning commission in the coming months. First, staff is going to publish a notice of availability of the draft environmental impact report, so they've already done that. And they're going to accept public comment for 60 days, which they're in the process of currently. Staff's also going to organize a public hearing to receive public comment on the draft EIR. So that's not something required by state law. That's just something that staff is doing because we recognize that the public likely wants an opportunity to physically be present and to ask questions as opposed to just emailing in the questions. So staff is organizing that. Next, you see that orange box to the right. It says staff must ensure that the final EIR includes responses to all public comments and makes revisions as needed. That's to the final EIR. And then staff must prepare a staff report, resolution, and ordinance for Planning Commission review. When this item comes before the Planning Commission will hold public hearings. The Planning Commission will decide during those public hearings whether or not to recommend certification of the final EIR, an amendment to the general plan land use map, an amendment to the zoning map, because the underlying land use needs to change from institutional to residential for this project to move forward. They'll consider recommending adoption of the specific plan and approval of the development agreement. That recommendation will then go to the City Council, and the City Council will also hold public hearings, noticed to every single resident in the city on those same 5 items. It's up to Chair Pevsner to determine in what order he would like to consider those. So Chair Pevsner, it's at your discretion if you'd like to consider any of those 5 items in any specific order when that time comes. Once that process is complete, assuming that the City Council does decide to adopt all 5 of those items in that first row, only then will that second row come into play. In that second row, you have the applicant will submit a development application for a tentative track map and design review permit. That design review permit will include architectural drawings for what the homes actually look like. Staff will then review the application for completeness and prepare a staff report and resolution for the Planning Commission's review. The Planning Commission will then hold public hearings regarding whether to recommend approval of the tentative track map, and the Planning Commission itself will review the design review permit. So the development director has decided to allow the Planning Commission to make that determination. Lastly, at the City Council level, the City Council will hold public hearing regarding whether or not to approve the tentative track map, and if there's an appeal of the Planning Commission decision regarding the design review permit, the City Council will hear that appeal. As you can see, the boxes in blue represent opportunities for public input, so there will be many coming opportunities for public input. So just in closing, I think 3 things I hope people take from this presentation, and things I've heard that I hope I don't have to hear again, are first, the process is being rushed. I just want to emphasize to people that the process is just about to begin. Legally, the process is just about to begin. Everything that came before it, that was all the developer putting together an application. The process legally has just begun with this draft environmental impact report in circulation. Next, that this process is not transparent. The city is doing everything it can to make it transparent, including answering all the questions it receives, providing the public documents, posting it on the website, requiring the developer to provide notices to every single household, which again is unprecedented, and holding meetings like this to apprise residents of their opportunities for public comment and participation. Lastly, I know individuals have noted that the public hasn't had a sufficient opportunity for input. I understand that concern. And again, the opportunities for input are here before you, because everything that came before it was the developer putting together an application, letting the community know about what it's considering doing. Now is the time for public input, starting with the draft environmental impact report and continuing through all those blue boxes you see on that slide. And with that, the presentation is complete.
Great. Terrific, thank you. All right, so,
Should we ask our questions first?
oh yeah, I was gonna say, do you guys have any questions of the city attorney or staff?
I do have some questions. One of the things that you said, Mr. City Attorney, was that the Planning Commission has to decide if it's more appropriate to zone the area for institutional or residential. And I just wanted to clarify that point, because I don't know that it's up to us to zone it, to decide what's the more important zone is. My understanding is that they will be applying for a residential zone, and we are to determine whether or not we think that should go through. It's already zoned institutional, correct?
Correct.
So it's just up to us to decide if the project that comes before us as a residential application is acceptable.
Yes, because the Planning Commission will have to determine whether that specific parcel should be used for residential use, or should it remain institutional.
There are no applications before us to keep it an institutional. They have not put any applications in to maintain that or to build an institutional use there. They have strictly put in an application for residential use today.
Correct.
Can the Planning Commission zone that area whatever we want, or are we only allowed to respond to applications as to how it should be zoned?
Thank you for that clarifying question. The Planning Commission is limited to the application before it. So the Planning Commission cannot recommend a land use designation not being considered in the application. What's being considered in the application is a residential land use.
The institutional zoning that it is today is consistent with the general plan and not something that's up to us to change at this time.
It's currently consistent with the general plan, and in order for this project to move forward, there would have to be both a general plan land use map amendment as well as the zoning map amendment.
The draft EIR, when it is finalized, will it be recirculated for comment from the public before it comes before us? Or is the draft EIR, the finalized EIR a ministerial update?
The final EIR will go to the Planning Commission. Will not be recirculated.
Okay. Who generates the specific plan?
The specific plan was drafted by the applicant's consultant that they hired specifically for that component of the project. We also had an opportunity to review it, provide feedback and comment to try to address some of the city's concerns, staff's concerns with what was being proposed.
And when the specific plan comes before the Planning Commission, will we have the opportunity to recommend changes for it, much like the design review process, or is this a thumbs up, thumbs down process?
No, the Planning Commission will be able to provide their input in helping shape that specific plan document.
And that's also true of the development agreement as well.
And is the development agreement a legal contract, or there are about 17 pages of stuff that the Planning Commission probably doesn't read every single time it comes before us that has to do with complying with health and safety regulations and building codes and all that kind of stuff. Is the majority of it that, and there'll be a small section delineated for us to really focus on?
So the development agreement it's a legal contract. It's a statutory document. There are laws governing what a development agreement can and can't do, or what it must do. And I'd say the end half of it is probably things that the planning commission should leave to the attorneys, but the first half of it will deal with all the substantive concessions that the developer had agreed to ahead of time. So the net zero concept will be discussed in the development agreement, the park dedication, the open space dedication, development impact fees, all that will be in the development agreement.
Okay. And this is the first time that this has in any way, shape, or form come before the Planning Commission, this meeting tonight. And this is not a decision-making process tonight because we don't have any of the finalized information, any applications, finalized EIR, or anything. This is purely the first discussion of the topic, and it will actually get discussed once we have finalized documents.
Correct.
Those are my questions.
John, Peggy, Bob?
Yeah, a lot of people have asked me about, and there seems to be a lot of confusion about the MOU, which you already touched on a little bit. Some people have asked me, is the MOU the application, or does it take the place of the application? My understanding is that it's entirely separate, and the application is the specific plan and the other accompanying things. But I just want to make sure that that's 100% clear, that the MOU is not either the application or takes the place of the application.
That's correct, Commissioner Hutt. It was a completely separate document intended for the parties to come to some understanding regarding what this complex project would look like before they submitted an application, and to apprise the residents of what the developer is considering.
Okay. And then if the city approves the specific plan and certifies the EIR, then we go to the next step, which was the second level on that chart, and we look at the track map and the design review. Does that mean that we're going to do design review for all of the homes at the same time?
I believe it's for at the same time.
You would be reviewing all of the homes at the same time. The developer is proposing, as indicated in the specific plan, for floor plans, for building elevations, for different architectural themes.
Okay. So those would all happen at once, and then if that's approved, then they could go do construction documents and pull building permits. Okay. Thank you.
Correct.
So then, if I may, we're a pretty speedy body, but it would be unlikely that this would get done in one meeting. We're talking about seeing this for the next year to get through all of the various aspects of this. Is that safe?
Yes.
A point that was made tonight about the housing element, that the monastery was not asked to create low-income housing. These are recommended. The state asks us to set aside or to identify potential places, keyword being potential, and that we do not have the authority to take someone's land and tell them that they must build affordable housing on it. But if we are asked to give it our best guess as to where that could possibly happen in our town. And so this is a realm of possibility and not something that this is not a direction.
That's correct. It's almost an exercise that we have to fulfill through state requirements. If you look at our last housing cycle, the city actually built 3 moderate income units, which was the Highland Muse project. And that was a city-owned project, a city-owned building.
The A through D elements here are people who have been approached, who are sympathetic to the concept, but they also have not committed to building anything to address our arena numbers.
That's correct.
Okay, so these are all the realm of possibilities, not fact. Okay.
Peggy?
The memorandum of understanding is not a legal document, and it's not legally binding, it's just ideas.
It's a legal document, so it's legally binding. But it was written to be flexible because we knew that we were in COVID. And we knew that deadlines were going to be pushed, and so it was intended to be flexible, and obviously deadlines were pushed. The draft EIR, I think, was supposed to come out almost a year ago, and it's only been published very recently. So, yes, it's a legal document. Yes, it's legally binding, but it was intended to be flexible as a document.
So some aspects of that could change as we go through this process?
Yes. Correct.
So then I guess towards that point, you mentioned something very important, and I just want to clarify that. After the extended period during which the EIR is being reviewed by the public, then the comments will come back, and it could take quite a bit of time to go ahead and update that. So there very well could be a long length of time where it seems like nothing is going on, and this is not a city delay. This is more than likely the time that it takes to get the next draft of the EIR.
Correct. Depending on how many questions we receive and comments we receive, it could take a lot. It could take a lot of time to address all of those.
And is that the same for once they've completed that EIR and it starts dropping down to the second level, that there could be quite a bit of time between it getting certified and the application actually coming in?
Yes, it could take over a year. Right.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? No? City liaison, you want to add something? Since I'm going to let everybody else talk? Okay. All right, maybe later. Okay, so that's the input from this planning commission. I'll open it up to the public since they're here. Again, this is an opportunity to talk on this issue only. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Deputy City Clerk, are we calling speaker cards? Have we received any?
We have, however, the speaker cards did not note which item they wanted to speak on, so I am simply taking your card with your name and taking notes on what your comments are.
And Deputy City Clerk, would you mind keeping time if we're unable to hear?
Sure.
I'm sorry, before you start, I did have one last question. I thought that I saw that people could call in as well.
No, we don't have the
No call-in.
call-in ability
Okay,
as we
thanks.
did in the past.
Okay, my name is Tricia Searcy again, and the main point I want to make goes to the zoning question. To my mind, this is a threshold question. This body has total discretion to just say, deny this zoning application. The property is asking for approval of a request for a zoning change that has not yet even been submitted. I've been in email correspondence with Mr. Garagosian and Mr. Gonzalez, and so far as I understand it, still right now, there has not been a request for zoning change that has been submitted. They submitted a development application and a request for a map amendment. They did not submit, and under our law, we have 17.64.030, the director shall prepare a suitable application form entitled Request for Zone Change and shall assist any applicant in preparing the request form. Any such application shall be accepted for filing by the director only upon payment by the applicant of a filing and processing fee and a sum set by the council. That hasn't been done. So this is the most significant zoning change in the history of Sierra Madre. And we're jumping over to that request and folding it into these other things. Now, Mr. Garagosian tells me that you all have the discretion whether or not to consider things separately. Well, as I say, that request hasn't even been submitted yet. So, and I'm going to argue that I think once you get that request, I haven't gotten a response yet. Hopefully, I'll be getting the response that yes, you'll be complying with this ordinance and requiring that a formal request be submitted and paid for, and then that it will come before this body, and hopefully you will have a separately noticed hearing. I know there's a lot of members of the community who would like to see a separately noticed hearing on this proposed zoning change request. And I think that there has been a lack of transparency on this issue. At the last city council meeting, someone asked the city attorney directly, can you just deny, or do you have any obligation to grant any zoning change? and our mayor instructed him not to answer. There were calls from the gallery, answer the question, answer the question. No, not happening. So we do have a transparency problem. And I feel like when Mr. Garagosian talks in his presentation about all of the notice that people have been getting, it's strictly from the developer's perspective. Nobody is asking the residents, what do you think about this? They're not saying, do you know that we don't have to grant this application? Or they could present it as saying, you know, these people want to build this project. They're not allowed to right now. Do you think it's a good idea? It's not being done that way. Those workshops that were in 2020, I went to one of them. It was a presentation, it was a slideshow by the developer. There's been a lot of promotion by the city on the developer's behalf. That's what the notice is. But there's no discussion on what alternatives are. There's no presentation to the residents to let them know that through you guys, through the Planning Commission, through the City Council, you represent the residents, and the residents might have different ideas about whether or not this project should be built.
Thank you.
So, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm tired.
Thank you.
Planning Commission members, Matt Bryant, 635 Edgeview Drive. I'm also with the Protect Sierra Madre Stop the Housing Project Coalition. As you review the Monastery project, you are going to be hearing concerns about the worsening drought in California, concerns about the traffic issues associated with this project, whether at the two ingress-egress points at Sunnyside or along Carter, or the citywide traffic congestion. Also, the concerns from almost every neighbor living within a quarter-mile radius around the property who don't like what they have seen thus far. Concerns about the loss of open space. Concerns about the density of the project that evidently has increased because while the project up until very recently was billed as having 20 acres, I understand now it has only 17. But I'm not going to discuss those details right now. What I do want to say is that there is no issue that could have come up during the creation of the recently released environmental impact report that would have changed the scope of this project of 42 homes. It wouldn't matter if the drought dried up the Colorado River and all the lakes in California. They would still be pushing a 42 home project. Even if Sunnyside was going to be the only way in and out of the project, the scope of the project would not have changed from 42 homes. Both Madre de la Rosa and the developer have consistently said for years that they were going to put forth a project that was going to be sensitive to the neighbors. But they have evidently failed miserably with respect to that because almost every neighbor is passionately opposed to the project. Did they adjust the project in any way to take into account the neighbors' concerns? Not at all. But they did manage to get a 1 acre buffer to protect their retreat center from the housing project. And the reason that any and all challenges encountered during the creation of the EIR are being glossed over and the concerns of the neighbors and the community at large are being ignored is because this project is being solely driven by profit. Madre de la Rosa wants to maximize the amount of money they can get from the sale of this property, and the developer wants to maximize their profit. So regardless of any problems they encountered in preparing the EIR or concerns from the residents, they need to squeeze 42 homes into this project come hell or high water. And that's where the Planning Commission comes in. We trust that you will be looking out for us. We have no obligation to approve a bad project just because Madre de la Rosa needs the money and the out-of-town developer wants to maximize their profit and then move on to their next project, while the residents of Sierra Madre are stuck with the results. Please look out for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm back again, David Beach. That's some questions on the affordable low-income housing. It was presented last week. It's 204 units, I believe, over 9 years. So we keep talking about we need to rush and put 204 units out here. We have a number of multi-unit properties in this town. Some of them could be upgraded for these things. Are we looking at, and some of them are surrounded by not so good properties that could be redeveloped. Are we looking at trying to manage over 9 years? You know, that would only be what? 22, 23 units a year or something like that, as opposed to this massive, 204 units. We seem to be talking about that. I think that's something that ought to be considered in the city's plan, is to manage this over a period of time, if we end up having to do it. And then I would challenge on the water issue. When we talked about the city water manager saying, we have no problem getting water. The state is limiting water into the Central Valley. They're limiting water being delivered to Southern California. New report is going to continue on. Lake Mead is at the point where they may not be able to generate any power. Lake Powell's in the same thing. They're draining lakes all up through the drainage into the Rockies. So, and that water is shared with Nevada, Arizona, Mexico, and California. I think some research on this, on what our water needs, ability to get, are going to be not what it is right now. 42 units of $3 to $4 million homes are going to drain a lot more water than our existing residences do. So that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you for having this hearing. I'm Matthew Loscalzo. I live up the block, and I'm very concerned about what is happening, and I appreciate all the work that you're putting into this. But I have a math question. Maybe you could help me. You got this unprecedented really process where the developer is going to let everyone in town know. So this is about $120, $130 million project. How much is that going to cost for him to send out a group postage of what's happening? Is that going to be $12,000 or $10,000 for a $120 million project? Is that the unprecedented goal that we got out of these people? That's a question.
I'm going to answer questions at the end once public comment's done. I will.
Thank you.
I'm Barbara Velturo. If anybody's on social media, you know that I post a lot and I write a lot. I'm much better writing than trying to get my thoughts together, so I have things printed out. Can I give them to everybody rather than?
Sure, bring it up to Jen.
Here, you can pass them. I don't know how many I've got, but you can pass them out to everybody.
It's already here.
Okay, and I also.
Aren't you immunized, boy?
Track because new things come up. Okay, whenever you need to start.
Just don't put it in your mouth.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of problems with some of the information that came out today. One thing, the attorney says that COVID hasn't been driving this, that we had an obligation when we got an application to process that, and that's what we've been doing for over a year. Well, I did a public records request. Actually, I did many of them, but one particular one asked for any applications that had been put on the on the monastery project. The only application for planning, for land use, for development was done in March of 2021. So everything that happened before that was without an application, without any application. another problem I had is, Vincent had mentioned when someone asked him about who did the specific plan, he said the developer's consultant. Well, that was supposed to be our consultant. When we did the MOU, and I wrote to Gabe about it, the city hired, hired MIG to review the draft EIR and the specific plan. The city paid, but the developer reimbursed them. The contract was with the city, but there were several times in presentations where the developer mentioned how grateful they were that Vincent and everybody was helping them with their specific plan. So this was supposed to have been an independent reviewer, but he was working more for the developers than for the cities that hired him. That was, oh, and the other thing, Tricia had asked about why we don't have a zoning application. When I did a public records request that I got in May, they had not separated the monastery property from the land that they're going to ask to rezone. That was in May. They had submitted a, lot line adjustment. And they got back the information that you can't create 3 lots out of 1 because of the Subdivision Act. They said that the person would have to go back and find out how the 3 lots had become combined and then resplit them. I don't know if they've done that yet, but as of May, they didn't have it. So it's still all one property. It's got one AIN number, and it's not been divided, so they can't do a zoning. They can't zone the whole thing, because then the retreat center would be asking to be residential, and they're not going to do that. I think they're kind of putting the cart before the horse on some of these things. They've had, the draft EIR came out well over a year ago. Well, it didn't come out. The application, the notice of preparation came out, went in over a year ago. The draft EIR came from the first draft EIR came out in December. Then it went to our independent reviewer, who's been working with the developer since then on getting the draft EIR and the specific plan all lined up.
Yeah, please.
And if you look at the draft EIR, someone said it looks like it's made for this project. That's because it was.
Thank you.
Again, Alex Arietta. I'm also one of the steering committee members for Protect Sierra Madre Stop the Housing Project. So a couple of key points. Just in regards to a few things that the city attorney referenced in terms of the process and wanting to have this process of transparency or have this approach with transparency. He referenced the MOU in March of last year, 2020, and that the public was aware of that. And we also need to be reminded that it was also the onset of the biggest global pandemic in the last 100 years. So people weren't paying attention, and people haven't been paying attention. Wrong, right, or indifferent, right? That's just the way it's been, because people have been more concerned with wanting to stay alive and not catch the virus. So the city attorney has also spoken about all these extraneous efforts that the developer has been doing. Well, this is a pretty extraordinary project that they are proposing. So it would be expected that they would go above and beyond to communicate with the community, especially during a pandemic. So I don't think they've done anything extraordinary. I think the only thing they have been focusing on are the marketing efforts for the project. They've done a very good job with that. But there's been no effort to engage with the community by the city council, frankly, or anyone to say, what do you think about a project like this or an institutional project? There's been no gauging of public opinion in regards to that. Secondly, the attorney spoke as well about the fact that there cannot be a restriction on property developers, property owners, excuse me. And of course there's not. We know that property owners, we're all property owners. We all know about property rights. However, we do expect the Planning Commission and the City Council to hold the city's largest property owner accountable for a project that is conducive to the community and that frankly the community is also going to be responsive to, not necessarily the one that's going to be the most profitable. The last point is around the EIR, the draft EIR, which Barbara was making some very important comments about. The draft EIR just came out this past week, and I remember having discussions with Gabe before he left saying, hey, this thing was supposed to come out in January, right? Delay, it's been 8 months. But one thing that was really important is that MIG, again, who is supposed to be hired by the city to review on behalf of the city and the residents, entered into an amendment with the city where they would own the draft EIR contents, right? And this only came 2 days or so after one of our steering team members asked for information about it. So that's not good. Lastly, I want to finish up with the zoning change. We definitely are in favor of the Planning Commission considering the zoning change first before they launch into discussion, consideration around the actual specific plan. We can't put the cart before the horse, and that is going to be the threshold issue here. We don't believe the zoning change should be made at this point.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Beckham, and I live at 337 North Lima Street. I am not on any of these individual neighborhood gatherings. I just paid attention beginning in March. I didn't do anything in the August of 2020 because I was staying home because I'm 73 and I wasn't about to go out and talk to people or do anything. So I'm sorry. You tell me that you are, you've reached out to us. There's so many people on my street that haven't got a clue as to what's going on, and a lot of them are older and they don't know how to Zoom. So I'm just telling you the way it is. However, I'm very concerned because I had a 45-minute conversation with Gabe before he left. Because I was talking traffic because I have a lot of background dealing with traffic. And he said, it's going to be pretty imperceptible as to what's going to happen, but there are 800 cars and they're going to come and go at different times. I said, well, but Gabe, let's talk about the area up by Bailey Canyon. It's narrow. Little Grove is not even a real street up there. It's more like a lane. He said, well, you're right. One of the former mayors considered maybe cul-de-sacing that little street to try to protect it because it's so tiny up there. So, okay, that means they come out of the egress on Carter, and the first street that they can come barreling down to get to town is Lima, the street I live on. And I watched the fire trucks going up and down Lima because it became the default for the emergency vehicles during the Bobcat fire last September. Thank God we had the street being wide enough so that people could go up and down the street because we needed them to. But I am not really thrilled with the idea of more traffic. We don't even have sidewalks up there. But on top of that, if you look at that egress on Carter, that's county land. They haven't even addressed the county. And I read that EIR Saturday and Sunday until my eyes were crossed. The county was never brought in. There's no parking up there right now, and you're going to now let the developers are planning just to open the gate and let them come out. Now, you know more than I do about the legality of an MOU, but when the city manager is negotiating with people, and they're talking 20 acres for 42 ohms, and that's about the size we're talking about, and then we get something in black and white, and we're now dealing with 17 acres minus one more because you want another acre for some sort of a buffer zone between the monastery and the rest. I'm sorry. I'm sure Gabe negotiated in good faith for 20 acres for those 42 houses. I don't trust these developers after I saw that, let alone the fact they didn't go to the county and even talk about the land on either side of Little Carter because there's no sidewalks up there. That's an accident waiting to happen. And I want you to know, I called the city fire chief because I wanted to talk to him, and he said, it's one of my major concerns. So it's just not Nancy Beckham talking about it. A lot of other people feel the same way. And on that note, I'm going to sit down. Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Susan Newhausen. I live up at the top of Grove Street. I agree with everything that has been said, and just personally living up there, I can't imagine the construction and all the vehicles going up for that. The dirt, the noise, the disruption to the wildlife that lives up there, it's just, and the drop in our property values, I think that's a given. But I specifically actually want to comment. So the city attorney said, the city may not be able to or can't prohibit housing. I agree with that, but they could have not established an MOU for a housing project. And second, they can determine not to change the zoning from institutional to the specific plan. And I agree that that should be the first step. And so I started scanning the specific plan, and that's actually what I want to comment on, and specifically commenting on the 42 single-family homes. So again, it was supposed to be 20 acres, and if you look at their table 3.1, their 42 dwelling units are actually going to be on 9.19 acres. So if you do the math, that's 4.56 houses per acre, which is a lot different than what they were saying, with a mean lot size of 9,530 square feet. And so what's important about that is that I saw that the specific plan actually supersedes all city zoning plans. And so if you look at their next table, I think it's 3.2, they have the lot area minimum of 7,800 square feet. The lot coverage, it says a minimum of 50%, which potentially they meant a maximum. But any way you look at that, if you consider section 17.20.125 of the city for the allowable gross floor plan area, which includes also the garages, they're actually well exceeding that with their 50%. Even their 7,800 square foot lot, which is their minimum, they want a 2,700 square foot house, you add in the garage, they're already at 37.5% of coverage. So that's much more than any of us are allowed in the city, and it doesn't make sense to me that they should be able to do that. In addition to that, they also then, ADUs can be put in, which actually increases the density even more. So I think the specific plan has to be really carefully considered, and I actually went to 2 of the presentations of Urban West, and I kept asking, it's like, well, what are the true lot sizes? You have this minimum. How many are at the minimum? What's the distribution of these lots? You've now drawn out these plats. You actually know. And as importantly, how many of these are single-story and two-story houses? And he said, oh, it'll all be in the specific plan. Well, actually, none of it is in the specific plan. So, you know, that's just one small example of the worry of, you know, this being the zoning change, and they want it to be considered at the same time as the specific plan. And the specific plan actually has a lot of issues, and that's just the one I'm talking about, which is the housing. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, well, we appreciate all your comments. Anybody, we'll bring it back to the commission. Want to make some closing comments, or you want to answer any of the questions, Mr. City Attorney?
I'm prepared to answer some of the questions if
Sure.
you'd like.
Sure, if you want to proceed, unless anybody else has questions. No? Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Alex.
So to clarify, today I won't be answering any of the questions related to SEQA or the specific plan because those are substantive. I'm just going to talk about the procedural questions that were raised. Those questions will be answered. They're all good questions, and the developer and the EIR consultant are going to need to answer them because I'm not the specialist in that. So with respect to these questions regarding the procedure, first, Ms. Cersei asked a question about whether the application for a zoning amendment is going to be submitted. Absolutely, it has to be submitted, as you noted, per our municipal code. So hasn't been submitted yet, because the application is, and that's why the application is incomplete. It will be submitted before it goes to the Planning Commission. Next, there was also a point raised regarding why there was no discussion of alternatives with the community. This is a challenging one because, again, it's the applicant that submits the project. It's not the city submitting the project. So if the city was going to submit the project, then we can talk about alternatives to the project, but it's the applicant that submitted the project. An individual approached the podium and said 204 units over 9 years. Small corrections, it's over 8 years, not 9 years. That's the housing element period. Someone asked, why didn't the city council approve the draft that went to HCD? The city council doesn't need to approve the draft that goes to HCD. That's usually done by staff. That document goes to HCD. HCD comments on it, and the city council has to approve and the planning commission will have to review that housing element, the final one, before the draft one with HCD's comments before it gets approved and becomes the final document. That will then also go back to HCD for a 90-day review. What are the consequences for missing the deadline for the housing element? The deadline is going to be October 15th. We're probably going to miss it because we just don't have enough time between receiving HCD's comments and having all of our hearings. But HCD understands that, the state understands that, because everyone is behind in their timeline. So they've built in about a 120-day buffer. And so although our housing element will likely be adopted late, we have that 120-day buffer. After that 120-day buffer, that's when the serious consequences begin, including making us do housing elements more frequently, depriving us of grants, potentially taking away our ability to review certain projects. Someone had talked about whether or not our water utility director was aware of all the water issues. I can promise you he's an expert in this field. He actually gave a presentation to the city council at the last meeting. I encourage everyone who has questions about our water supply to review that presentation because it goes in detail about all the sources of water. Currently, just now, we have enough supply for all the residents in the city. We're working with the city of Arcadia to drill a new well that's going to be an additional source of supply. So whereas they're cutting, whereas he's right, the state is cutting water deliveries to certain, from certain sources, a lot of our water is groundwater. So it's not affected necessarily by what the state is cutting. An individual asked me how much it would cost to notice. I honestly don't know what that cost is, but I want to emphasize that that notice cost is going to happen 4 times. Twice related to CEQA and one for the Planning Commission hearing and once for the City Council hearing. But those aren't the only costs borne by the developer. The developer is going to bear a bunch of other costs, including net zero payments, development impact fees, this EIR, the specific plan, the cost for me drafting the development agreement. There are a lot of costs built into this project. So I don't want the residents to think, oh, no big deal, 17,000 or whatever that was quoted, because it's much more than that. Activities done without an application, someone mentioned that. That's true, and that's normal of all projects. If someone's going to build something in the city, it would be foolish to just try to submit a document right away. You'd want to come to the counter, they talk to city staff, they say what can be built, here's what I'm thinking. That's just a totally normal process, and everybody does that. So yes, there are always discussions before a development application is submitted. Someone mentioned that MIG's, there was a question regarding MIG's relationship with the city. So to clarify, the developer hired Dudek to prepare the EIR, and the city hired MIG as their technical expert, and we're making the developer bear the cost of that because the city shouldn't have to bear the cost. So that's a savings for taxpayers. We hired MIG, and MIG works for us and takes direction from Director Gonzalez. Someone mentioned that the draft EIR, it's as if it was made for this project. it was made for this project. This draft ER was crafted for this specific project in mind. And MIG is reviewing it. MIG is basically reviewing Dudek's work. And those are all the points I have to address. I think maybe Director Gonzalez would like to address a few others.
Actually, I think you captured the majority of the comments. Yes, we'll acknowledge some of the other things. Let's see. In terms of there was a comment about they can build accessory dwelling units on these 42 homes. That could be the case. That is a state law, and actually we have a discussion regarding drafting a new accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which is the next item as a discussion item before the Planning Commission tonight. So if you wanted to stay for that, some of the state laws will be cleared up, and hopefully some of those issues regarding accessory dwelling units in general.
That's the next, that'll be at the next, that's what we're gonna discuss next.
I have no further
Okay.
clarifications.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Go ahead, John.
I have one procedural question. One or maybe two of the applicants or the speaker said that we should consider the zone change separately or before the specific plan. But isn't the specific plan the zone change? I mean, I guess the application hasn't been submitted, but my understanding is the request is going to be to change the zoning from institutional to specific plan.
I believe that's correct. Director Gonzalez can clarify that point.
Yes, that's correct.
So it's one thing, right?
Right, and just to emphasize, the documents themselves are interrelated. So it's appropriate to consider them all at the same hearing, but if we want to consider one document before the other, that's at the discretion of the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Okay. All right. Peggy, no? Okay. All right. Well, before we go on to the next meeting, I think we'll take a short break. It's if that's okay with everybody, unless they have objections. No? Yeah, let's take a small break. Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you.
I'll get you some.
I need one. All right, well, we'll bring the Planning Commission back to order, and we'll go on to our last discussion item, the municipal code changes to comply with the state requirements for accessory dwelling units.
Yes, and we have a PowerPoint presentation by Associate Planner Wolf.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Tonight we'll kick off the discussion for the second unit ordinance. To begin, just a little bit background. Housing legislation that was passed in 2017 and then again in 2019, it limits the city's regulation and ability to regulate ADU development. And just to clarify for those listening, an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, which is also referred to sometimes as a granny flat. Essentially, it is a dwelling unit that is independent and accessory to a primary dwelling. So to continue on the background, in early 2020, City Council stopped enforcement of second unit ordinances. More specifically, they suspended it. And the update to our ordinance as of now is necessary for the current second unit ordinances misses some points important to the elements of the state ADU law. And there are differences between state ADU law and the city's second unit ordinances, which causes confusion for the general public. More specifically, that we have the ADU ordinance up available on our MuniCode website. Many times applicants refer to it, but it is not currently enforced and therefore causes confusion for those applicants. So in this presentation, I'll be interchanging the terms second unit, accessory dwelling unit, and ADU. So on July 13th, staff requested from the City Council direction on policy decisions regarding ADUs and received the following direction. First was to resume a second unit amnesty program with a sunset provision. Second was to incorporate a financial incentive program for affordable ADUs and explore additional methods for financial incentives. And third was to gauge the input of the Planning Commission regarding public facility fees for ADUs. Now just a quick synopsis on what the amnesty program is. It would allow those units that were built either without permit or already existing to be converted to an ADU at minimum cost or no cost. The financial incentive program was offered as a way to capture low and moderate income housing tied to a deed restriction at the concession that the applicants would have reduced or no city fees. And then the public facilities fees is something that the city may charge as a way to levy costs that incur from an impact for those ADUs. And to clarify, those would be only ADUs that are above 750 square feet. The staff had also recommended that they only be charged for ADUs that are above 800 square feet so that they are more in line with the state exempted ADU. So in addition to those things that Planning Commission should discuss regarding City Council's recommendation is more specifically on the development requirements for ADUs. And in this ordinance, it would be first for the terminology, second for short-term rentals, third for parking, fourth for height and number of stories, fifth for development beyond those requirements imposed by the state, and sixth for the tree preservation, and seventh for historic preservation. So to begin in terminology, the second unit is, the term second unit is often confused when in reference to a dwelling in a multifamily development that is beyond the first. So to relieve that, it is recommended that we refer, instead of second units, to, just to be referred to as accessory dwelling units or ADUs. In ordinance as well, so that would be changed to the ordinance's name, changed to the chapter's name, and any reference of second unit as it means as an accessory dwelling unit. This change would also be consistent with the nomenclature of the state law so that we can more easily reference state law when necessary. Short-term rentals. So currently, state law provides that the city may require that properties, that ADUs be used for rentals of terms longer than 30 days, so that's may require. And restricting the use of ADUs as short-term rentals addresses the California housing crisis, whereas a short-term rental, such as an Airbnb, it is commonly used as a vacation rental rather than a more permanent dwelling unit. And the section of our code, which is currently not enforced, it does prohibit the use of ADUs as short-term rentals, but since it's not enforced, staff is leaning on the state requirement or state mandate that says that it may require property owners use their ADUs for terms longer than 30 days. So it is recommended that we keep this language in our ordinance and use it once it's adopted to enforce prohibition of short-term rentals.
I just had do you want us to address these as we go through or at the end?
I'll have a summary at the end that we go through topic by topic. Okay, so parking. As of January 1st, 2020, the city may no longer require replacement parking structures when converting a garage or carport into an ADU. ADUs typically require one on-site parking space anywhere accessible on the property, but there are exemptions. First being for proximity to public transit. Second is the ADU being a part of the existing or proposed primary residence or accessory structure. What that really means is if it's a conversion of an existing structure or proposed structure, or has a portion of that being conversion, it's exempt from parking requirements. So, and additionally, the on-site parking is very commonly provided by the driveway within the 25-foot front yard setback of the property as it exists. So parking is usually just kind of a checkbox item that we always find is met anyway. So in lieu of that, staff is recommending that parking not be required except in residential canyon zones. And the reason for that is residential canyon zones are currently impacted by parking. Street parking is also quite impacted, so we find it necessary to require parking in residential canyon zones. Height and number of stories. Currently, state law provides that an ADU be at least 16 feet in height, approved ministerially. There is no definition for how height is measured, and it is instead deferred to the applicable zoning district. What that means in the R1 zoning code is that it can provide a height to be measured from a defined low point to a point between the top plate and the ridge of the roof at the first third of that height. Visually, that looks like this, where 16 feet is measured from the low point up to a third above the top plate, resulting in an overall height of 22 feet, potentially. It is recommended that the height be refined in definition to a point at a low point to the high point at the top of the ridge of a building. This would be more in line with the intent of low-density development per an accessory structure. It would also reduce costs to the applicant in terms of building costs and be more in line with what a more affordable unit would be. And so fifth, development beyond state requirements. This is a little odd, but city currently has the option to prohibit ADUs which do not meet the criteria defined by state law, meaning if someone wanted to do an ADU at 1,400 square feet, we would not permit that. If someone wanted to do an ADU that is greater than 16 feet in height, we would not permit that. But the city may also subject the ADUs to a design review permit process for those ADUs which go beyond that requirement or that criteria, which is additional height or additional floor area. There's currently no provision for that, nor no clarified provision for that. So there has been expressed interest from the community for ADUs that are beyond the height requirement and located on the second floor or beyond the 1,200 square foot limit. And to clarify, this would be for ADUs of new construction, not conversion. So staff is requesting the Planning Commission provide direction on how to address ADUs that would be proposed beyond those development requirement or criteria. Next, tree preservation. So the city's tree preservation ordinance requires that consent of the Public Works Department prior to the removal of a significant trimming of any protected species tree on or encroaching on private property. If a prescriptive plan program is ever implemented, which was mentioned in our housing element update, it may result in overlooking of the requirements for tree preservation. It is recommended that the tree preservation ordinance be referenced and codified as part of the update to this ordinance. That's just a measure to ensure that applicants looking at the ordinance are aware of the tree preservation requirements. And lastly, for historic preservation, state laws providing that the review of an application for ADUs be ministerial and without discretionary action, unless it does not meet the specific development standards if a city has such ordinance. The zoning code currently provides that a discretionary review take place where there is an alteration to a property built 75 years or more prior to the date of an application. It is recommended that section 1760.056, this is the discretionary demolition permit process. The specific subsection is in regards to the exemptions from those permit processes, be amended to include specific ADUs in that list of exemptions. This is to resolve the conflict that arises when someone wants to develop an ADU on a property that is older than 75 years of age. So to summarize, these are the topics we would like Planning Commission to discuss tonight. Regarding policy topics, this is from City Council, was to resume the Amnesty Program with a sunset provision, additional financial incentives and public facility fees for ADUs, and then by tonight's presentation, it was for the ordinance terminology, short-term rentals, parking, height and number stories, development beyond state requirements, tree preservation, and historic preservation. And just before I conclude this, I did want to point out that I've received additional community concern regarding ADUs within the front yard area. As far as staff is aware, there's no state provision restricting ADUs in the front yard. So it would defer to the underlying zone's requirements of front yard setback. We've seen a couple ADUs go up in the front yard where we have determined they are within the front yard setback, or they're not within the front yard setback, I'm sorry, they're beyond the front yard setback, but they're in front of the primary dwelling. So it appears as though someone's building an accessory structure in front of their dwelling. We found that there would be no conflict with that because it still meets the front yard setback requirements. And that would conclude this presentation. We can open that up for discussion.
Can we leave this up here? Thank you.
Questions for Josh? Specific or just?
Well, I don't have a specific question for Josh. I have a general question. And the general question is, what are we doing? Because I feel like we're rushing into granular issues, and I don't even know what the main issue here, and I don't understand what council direction is. And I reviewed the staff report, and especially the staff report to the city council, and it talked about like cutting fees to 50% of really, really detailed stuff. But I don't see anywhere we've asked the question that said, look, here's the problem where our ordinance doesn't meet state law, and what do we want to do about it? And then, what do we think about ADUs? I mean, in my perfect world, and you know, where we talk about how we communicate, and we've had a lot of communication issues between us and council, and we can blame a lot of that on COVID and Zoom and whatnot, but I feel like council would first attack the issue and then give us direction that would be not like cut the grading fee by 50%, which is amazingly detailed, but it's, look, ADUs are really important to the city and really important to us meeting the housing, so pull out all the stops to make them go. Or, you know, we like ADUs, they're pretty good. Do what you can to help them, or, yeah, ADUs, not so great. Just do whatever the state requires, but, you know, not much else. That, like, level of general direction would be really helpful to me as we go through these. And maybe the city council liaison could give us some insight on that, but that's the kind of direction I would have hoped to get from the city council, but as we start this exercise. And then, you know, when there's this issue of the public facilities fees and the incentives, I really don't know what we're even trying to get at there. And so I guess that's sort of my conundrum, and I don't feel like I have the ammunition to really dig in yet, because I don't know what our goal is or the right direction. And I really fear, and I think we've done this before, where we sort of go, well, I like ADUs, so we go off and we put all these policy proposals to the city council, and they get this, and they're like, well, why'd you guys do this?
Yeah, and then there's the feeling between the commission and the city council that they're not talking to each other, and that we are somehow a rogue organization off doing what we want to do, and bad feelings follow. I agree.
So why don't I start with some of that, and I'd like to defer to staff first, and because I'm not sure the reason this came to city council, what the driver was to bring it to city council. So Planner Wolf or Director Gonzalez, if you could help with that, and then I can talk about the discussion and where it came from and my views on the direction that came, and then I can also take it back to council and continue that dialogue on it, and I may even take some of the dialogue as allowed by the Brown Act, or up to the requirements of the Brown Act, to help us prepare for the next meeting, to make sure that there's that clear communication.
Okay.
So this conversation was initiated because the city council repealed the second unit ordinance, or actually we drafted an accessory dwelling unit ordinance in response to state requirements as an urgency ordinance. So the planning commission did not review that at the time. Is that correct, Josh?
Draft urgency ordinance went directly to city council.
Right. I'm trying to remember if the planning commission reviewed the ADU ordinance at any point. I don't believe so.
No.
So we drafted it because it was required to be in place by January 1st, 2020. The state usually signs bills in November, so it doesn't give a lot of time between Christmas holiday to be in compliance. So that happens often. It goes to the city council. They approve it as an urgency ordinance. We implement the document, and then there's some advocacy and nonprofit groups that would analyze these ordinances across jurisdictions and point out elements that are non-compliant with the state requirement and threaten lawsuit. So what the city council determined was to repeal that ordinance, and that we would apply in full the state ordinance. But that left us in a little bit of a problem because they did not repeal the second unit ordinance. So that is what is up on our website, creates confusion, and now we are trying to clear that issue up. So we went to city council to get policy direction in terms of some of the concepts that were presented to them by staff, different areas and different opportunities to look at, including waiving fees. Should we impose a public facilities fee? City council gave clear direction the first time we drafted the ordinance, as well as this time that would appear to be a disincentive when we're trying to incentivize ADUs, and that's what staff is trying to do, is come up with ways to incentivize ADUs, and some of the topics including bringing back the Amnesty Program for a short duration of time based on funding availability.
And can you clarify, was this done in 2020 or 2021?
This was done in 2020.
Okay, so it was done by the previous
Yes.
council. So then, when was it done by the previous council? Was it done in November or December of 2020, or was it January of the year? I'm trying to make sure I get the timing right so I can think through.
If Josh can correct me, I believe that was done in December 2020.
Okay.
Or maybe 2019.
Just to clarify, I think we passed the urgency ordinance in December of 2019.
Right.
Then was suspended by
2020.
consent in February of 2020.
That's right. And there are two main headings there: policy topics and development regulatory topics. The policy topics, staff sought council direction for, because those aren't things that are required under the state law. The development regulatory topics, those are points where state law gives us pretty clear guidance, and it gives us a little bit of wiggle room. And we thought for those, detailed regulatory topics, the best place to start is the Planning Commission. And for those bigger policy topics, we thought the best place to start was the City Council.
And I think that part of the driver of this coming in was, we had just finished the housing element. We'd gone through, there's been all the discussions of RENA related to the housing element, and your recommendation to council that ADUs was a really valuable way for us to meet those housing requirements. And so the way I took it is that what we want to try to do is make it easier to create ADUs. The financial incentives starts to get into some of the details, and I'd be willing to take back to council some flexibility around that, because you guys know how to build these definitely much better than I do. But we're trying to think through, what's the impact on the budget of the city in building these, and what is it that we can do to incentivize the building of them, not make it too difficult. And so part of the presentation that we had was looking at different fees that different cities have and different fees that there are there. And our discussion was, okay, how can we make those fees easier and more straightforward for the development of ADUs without having a financial drain on the city?
And so are we talking about setting lower fees, or are we talking about subsidizing fees with some other pot of money that we have?
It would be subsidizing fees in a concession and an agreement with the applicant that they do a deed restriction, including limitations on the rental.
And wouldn't a public subsidy require them to comply with prevailing wage law?
So the public subsidy, that's something we have to consider. That's something I'll have to look into.
I think, my first instinct when I looked at the fee thing was, this is a homeowner building something in their backyard, or maybe front yard or side yard, depending. They're not sophisticated. They're not a giant developer who's going to send a notice to everyone in town, right? They don't have legal staff to figure all this out. They're going to look at this and go, no. And if it would require them to use prevailing wage, they're just not going to be able to do it, because they're not going to find a union trade to build a 750 square foot unit, and it's going to drive the cost through the roof way more than any fee we could give. So I really think the whole fee thing works on big projects where people can analyze it and they have number crunchers. I don't think a homeowner's going to do a deed restriction. They're not lawyers. They're going to look at this and go, that's weird. I think if we have some money that we want to subsidize, the best way we could do it is design plans, like a set of sample plans that are pre-approved and we could even hand out for free. Maybe we could get local architects and builders to approve them and price them out. And then, one of the big issues we have is we don't have a lot of review authority. So, people could build stuff that's not so great, and we can't really regulate that. But if you have a free plan that looks pretty good, I think people might want to go to that. And that's just a lot easier and simpler, I think, than doing complicated math. I sort of dig the complicated math, I gotta say. I mean, that's what I do, right? But I just don't think that's gonna happen for somebody who's building a one-bedroom, ADU in their backyard.
Yeah, and also the history of this commission is, we usually don't try to affect the budget items in the city of Sierra Madre. We look at other things, zoning and stuff like that, but we're not privy to the budget considerations. And so for us to make a decision about, oh yeah, let's charge them $5, I think that the city council sets the budgets and they should do what they need to do. What I believe that John has presented is a phenomenal additional program, and if the city wants to fund that element, then it will incentivize, but I don't think we should have the authority to decide how much, because I believe all the fees are based on how much it costs for us to produce the work that is associated with that. And we don't have the authority to say, well, do less work, or don't do this, or whatever, pay them less, or anything like that. So I'm not in favor of us setting a number in terms of fees, but I am in favor of something like John is doing, saying, look, we're going to make it easier for you to build this ADU and also protect the city's interest by giving you these sample plans that you can adopt. You won't have to hire an architect, sorry, and you won't have to, do other kinds of things, or your contractor will find this easier. These are the things that we know that we can live with, and it will facilitate the process, but not per se the costs.
And just to say, that both of those, both the public subsidy, sorry, not the public, the deed restriction is something that the city of Pasadena does, and I believe the city of Pasadena also has set designs for ADUs. So these are definitely ideas that other cities are instituting as well.
Yeah, I know LA, the city of LA has a lot of, I think they have 20-something approved ADUs now. They do it a little different in that the way they do it is a design team applies to the city and gets a pre-approval, and then if somebody wants to build that, they have to go to that design team. So they don't, so the resident doesn't get a free plan. So that's a different way to do it if we don't have I mean, it's my understanding that we have some maybe X redevelopment money or some other pot of money that we want to use on this. I think the idea of having a free plan is good, but even not a free plan, but one that's pre-approved would be helpful, because then this is good to go. And even if we don't have any zoning review and approval, you still got to do building code, and that can take a long time. And so if it's pre-approved through there, all you got to do is look at the changes for, the foundation and whatever all else, and that could facilitate the process. As far as the fees go, I agree with Bob. I don't want to have anything to do with impacting the budget. I mean, the way we structure the fees, I think, is something we can talk about. I've often thought that it's really, really dumb that we charge per dwelling unit. And what we should do is we should say, you get the first 750 square feet for free, and then you pay per square foot above that. And we should do that for everything. So if it's single family, multifamily, ADU, whatever. Because the bigger the house, the more impact. And we want to encourage people to build smaller and have more affordable. And so I don't know where we got the 800 or what's the, the 750 to 800, because my understanding was the state law was 750 was free. But, those are little details we can work out. But if you did, an 850 square foot and you got the first 750 feet for free, and then you paid per square foot for 100, that's not very much. Whereas if somebody's building a 4,000 square foot, dreaded McMansion, they'll end up paying a lot. And we can figure out all that math to make it revenue neutral.
That's a really interesting idea.
And I know there's been state proposals to require it to go that way, and those haven't passed yet, but I mean, to me, it just makes a lot of sense.
San Jose is another city that's got pre-approved products, and not just plans. There's companies that will come in and, pick that product, pre-approved by the city of San Jose, they buy it and they install it. And they're not all just, ugly things. Some are really nice, and some are really kind of even cottagey looking, these products they have out there. So I should talk to somebody in the city and point them in the direction of some of those products.
Yeah, the city of Santa Barbara has pre-approved plans as well.
Well,
So may I provide some input? The point of the incentives is to incentivize ADUs that are actually at affordable rent. So it's less about the development of the ADUs and more about trying to get them at affordable rents.
Yeah, I think the issue is we're trying to chase RENA numbers, right? And I think we have two goals. One goal is to play the state housing game, and we need to get our RENA numbers. I don't want to mince words about that. But the other, and I think we can't lose sight of this, is what's good and wholesome for our community. And I think we have a long history of, we used to call them granny flats or second units, now we call them ADUs, but whatever you call them, that is a feature that we've had in our town for a long time. And it's how we provide housing that's more reasonably priced for people who are just starting out, or for one reason or the other don't have the means to have the really big house. And we've always had in this town a wide range of housing and an eclectic mix. And I think that's really important. And so I understand we got to play the arena game and chase those, but I don't want to do it in a way that messes up the whole thing so we don't build ADUs. And I'm really concerned that if we say, oh, we're going to deed restrict everything or make it really cumbersome, people just aren't going to build them. Because, I can read the deed restriction, I'm a lawyer, but a lot of people aren't, and they just want to build the second unit. They want it to be simple. And so I think, first we're talking about, if you build a free unit that's 750 square feet or less, the rent is going to be pretty affordable generally. Not technically, right? But
Compared to what, though? The prevailing rents in the area? Because the rents are just ridiculous.
Under HCD rules, do we have to claim anything without a deed restriction to be moderate, even if it's a small unit?
Currently, we don't, and we can do it as a deed restriction. But the other thing to note is in our fifth RENA, or fifth housing element cycle, HCD allows us to count all of our ADU units as low income. And that's what we're hoping being able to do. So that way we capture every ADU as low income.
Yeah, I think that would be great if we could do that. And I think the deed restrictions and the really complicated math is going to hinder production generally. And I think one of the big issues we're going to have in our discussions with HCD is we think we can build all these ADUs, and they say, no, we can't. And if we make it easy, I think we will. I think there's a product that people will want to build in town, and I think people want to occupy. But if we try to chase especially very low, or what's the one under very low? Extremely low, we're just not going to build that. That needs subsidies.
And the idea that we can build stuff for extremely low and the people will come here to use it, I think, is also a bridge too far. If you are, I've worked in South Central, and if you were living in poverty, you kind of need to be able to walk to a supermarket. You need to be able to have public transportation because you don't have a car. You need to have all this stuff readily available. A place to do your laundry, because usually these units don't come with that. And this community is not set up to support that level of poverty. If you qualified, you wouldn't pick Sierra Madre to come and live in because you can't get anything else done.
Right. Unless you had a facility that had a lot of that stuff, like the senior housing.
Right.
But that's not going to be an ADU because inherently it doesn't have the ability to have all these social programs and assistance things.
Yeah. So while I understand what the state wants to do, and I think there are places where they can set up ways to do that, and maybe if the churches want to create a small village that includes some of the support mechanisms, they could pull it off.
Yeah.
But I don't think that the general public in Sierra Madre hears that message and can, the guy putting an ADU in the backyard. But a guy putting an ADU in the backyard to support a college student or somebody who's just got married who is of low income, I think but has a vehicle, I think is very doable. And I even see that even in my neighborhood. But I think that the very low income is, while it's an aspiration, I don't think in reality Sierra Madre is going to, fulfill that.
So if we're trying to meet the RENA numbers and the state says any ADU counts, anything that they call an ADU, which is 750 square feet or less. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Currently, even up to 1,200 square feet under what we're reporting to.
It's larger than my
Yeah.
first house.
But if you want to, keep it low, I really like the idea of just having no fees on the 750 or less.
Right, that's
I
state
mean,
law.
that-
We have to do that.
We have to do that?
For state law, 750, yeah.
No fees?
No,
Oh.
well, no,
What are we talking about?
no public impact. We're talking about the ones bigger, between
Bigger.
750
Okay.
and 1,200.
Okay. Then, I don't know.
And to clarify, the subsidy being contemplated would only be for those who voluntarily choose to have their property deed restricted to very low income or something like that. So it wouldn't apply to every ADU, right? Anyone can build an ADU. And we can also have a program that has, special plans that people can build. Just to, but there could also be potentially a subset of people who just don't have the funds and need a subsidy in order to build something. And we're saying, here's a pot of money that can be used so long as you're willing to deed restrict it. And maybe they'd be open to that. And I mean, I think you're right. It wouldn't probably be individuals coming from other neighborhoods, but it could be like a grandmother or something living in the back house, because Social Security is probably
Qualifies, makes
very
them
low
qualified, yes. And that may work. And if the city has a pot of money and they want to go down that road, I think that the city council should set that aside and write the policy for it, and it shouldn't come from us.
But I also think we should be realistic about that. I mean, if that's voluntary, I'm fine, right? Especially if it's sort of separate, so it doesn't clog up everything else. But we're going to get one or two of those in our RENA cycle. I mean, we're just not going to get a lot, and so we could get, quite a few second units, or we're calling them ADUs now. Sorry. And what is our target? 82? Is that what we have?
90.
90?
Yeah, 90.
Yeah, I think we could do
Over
that. I mean, I think that's realistic. I don't think we're going to get extremely low or very low. And if we get more than a handful, I'll be shocked. But I do think we need to research the whole prevailing wage issue, because if it's going to make it so that they have to spend $25,000 extra to get a $10,000 subsidy, well, we know how that's going to work. And I do think that if also that pot of money is fees that are use it or lose it, then that's a problem, because we're not going to use them that way. And I think they would be much better used doing sample plans that are pre-approved.
And I don't think that the money's a use it or lose it. It comes from our development authority, and I was trying to remember this earlier today. There was one of the units, the 70 Esperanza, and there was a change in contract or something. I'm trying to remember exactly how that funds came into the development agency.
A long time ago, to build that property, the city provided the redevelopment agency provided a loan.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
That developer is in the process of transferring his interest in that development to another developer.
Mm-hmm.
As a condition of that transfer, the city said, "Pay us back the loan," and they agreed. So that's where that money's coming from.
Thank you.
Yeah, see, I think that money would be much better spent talking to some of the churches who might actually be able to pull off some very low or even extremely low and provide the appropriate services along with it. Because those things are very, very difficult to do without a lot of subsidy, and we might actually get some of those.
So, may I ask a question of the city attorney? How would this implicate Assembly Bill 671, which requires city to include a plan that incentivizes and promotes the creation of ADUs that can be offered at affordable rents for very low, moderate income households?
I think I'll need to review that bill before I can give an opinion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But it sounds like if they consider them low, we're incentivizing. I mean, especially if we don't charge any fees and we provide free plans, and we, waive parking, and we'll go through all those, which I think we can deal with. There's a lot. I mean, it's going to be easy to build, right? And if they're considered low.
My personal concern is ensuring that they be affordable to very low, moderate households.
Yeah, well, I think if we consider them low, then they would be. I don't think we're gonna get very low or extremely low. That just doesn't seem feasible. But, I mean, fundamentally, a 700 square foot unit just isn't gonna rent for a ton of money. And if you look at the numbers, that is in line with what our low, and partly that's because of the weirdness of the way LA works, that the low is almost the same as the moderate, which is different than every other county. But the actual rents that you're gonna charge on that ADU in Sierra Madre are pretty close to the low rent that's allowed under the ACD rules.
Go ahead.
So then if I can just kind of clarify Commissioner Hutt's question, it sounds like the council heard us say we like ADUs to help us get our RENA numbers, and so the council has said figure out how to go get more ADUs. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, that was my understanding of what came out of the council meeting. What was the further thing that, and I think it was probably discussed at the meeting, but I've got greater understanding tonight, was that this was driven by the change in the law that we had to repeal, do an emergency repeal of our second unit ordinance. So that's the driver behind it, and then it was brought to us of let's continue to try to incentivize the development of ADUs, and I think some of the points here are deeper, but we had at a higher level at council the same type of concern about people putting a deed restriction in place for those units. But I will be taking back some of the comments here. Commissioner Spears, I particularly liked the infrastructure part of that is a really spot on and something that was not part of the conversation. So I think that's very valuable. But to your point, Commissioner Dennison, is that yes, we're trying to figure out how do we make it easier to create ADUs in Sierra Madre.
Okay, so then I guess if I'm kind of oversimplifying what I'm hearing, there's kind of two buckets here. There's the let's conform the code to work with state law because we have to. And the other part is how do we put some good incentives behind getting the people to do ADUs. Yeah. And we feel pretty squarely that the conforming the code is square in our bailiwick and exclusive of the financial incentives from the city coffers. We think that we can come up with some ideas that aren't exactly that, but are pretty creative.
But I guess from my perspective, is there things that, I mean, as the commission, you guys see the applications coming through. I don't want us to have something that we put in place that, to some of the comments here, that just aren't going to work. And I think that's the value I see of the conversation here tonight, and that I want to hear more about.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, the state requires jurisdictions to approve ADUs ministerial.
Right, we don't see them, per se.
Understood.
I mean, we can advise about policy, but we don't see them or approve them.
But I guess my point I'm trying to make is that you understand the building code, you understand the requirements, you understand I mean, the prevailing wage is one of the examples of something that I don't think anybody in council knew about. So those are the types of things that I think are valuable to provide the feedback to council.
That's the benefit of having John Hutt on this.
I agree.
Well, I think thank you all for indulging me in that detour, but I'm ready to go down to the nitty-gritty now.
Me too.
Yeah.
I did have some questions on there, if I can start. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Short-term rentals. Well, actually, let me start. I skipped terminology. So my understanding is that ADU is a very well-defined legal term in the state of California. And so one of the concerns that I heard was how can something, or people want to have an ADU, but it exceeds the limits. If the idea is to define the second unit as an ADU, I assume we would conform that to the state law, which would thereby preclude anything that wasn't conforming to that from being an ADU.
I see what you're saying. I think what you're saying is, if something, let's say with respect to height, if something is 17 feet, you're saying that wouldn't be an ADU because it doesn't meet the state definition of an ADU, right? Because the state definition says max 16 feet. Is that what you mean?
Sure, that's one example. If somebody says, I want to have, if the state limit for ADU is 1,200 feet, and they say, I want to have a 1,202 square foot ADU, then we say, you don't get a ministerial review because you don't meet the definition of ADU, and therefore all of our other zoning and codes would apply.
So I don't think it's that they don't meet the definition of an ADU. They don't meet the, they won't qualify for ministerial review for ADUs because they're above that max limit. So an ADU can be greater than 16 feet, although the state says you'll get ministerial review if you're 16 feet or less. Same thing with, gross floor area or setbacks or.
Yeah. So then I guess let me ask my question another way. If we define ADU to conform to state definitions, then anything that's not defined as an ADU would automatically have to conform with all of our existing code as it is today.
Correct.
And what would we call that,
What would
that
we
thing
call
that's
that?
not the ADU?
Call that a turbo ADU,
Yeah.
a TADU.
Yeah. So I guess I would be in favor of creating a definition for ADUs that exactly conforms to the state regulation, even if we have to update it every year when they put new bills through, so that we're limiting the ministerial approval to what we legally have to. But I think what that would mean is we have to create a second term, like second unit, for anything that does not qualify as an ADU. Because we have such limited purview and jurisdiction over anything that is a state mandated ADU. If we vary from that, I think we're just gonna get super confusing.
You could probably go about it two ways. You could do it that way that you'd suggested. You could also probably say that the following are going to be subject to discretionary review, and the following will be subject to ministerial review in the same ordinance or in the same chapter of the municipal code.
But you wouldn't call them different things?
You could call them both ADUs and say this one is going to be subject to ministerial review, this one's going to be subject to discretionary review. But you could also have separate terms for them if you'd like. It's up to you.
I thought at one point, and we've updated this ordinance like 12 times, so I can't keep track of which part we were at, but we still have guest houses, right? Which is basically an ADU without a kitchen. And so you can build a guest house and meet regular code. And if it goes over the limits, there's review and all that stuff. And then there's the ADU rule for conversion that you could convert your guest house into an ADU. And so to me, it seems like the easy thing to do is just have the ADU code be ADU. Like it's exactly what you're saying. Meet the state rules. Have it really streamlined. And if somebody really wants to build their guest house under R1 or Canyon or whatever zoning they're in, and then convert it later, they can do that. Because I think when we do the ADU and then the turbo ADU, and you could do this with it just gets really confusing. And to me, one of the ways to make this really go is to make it really easy.
So you're proposing an ADU is exactly as state defined, and if they want to build a guest house, which is something without a kitchen, that's a guest house. If they want to build a secondary dwelling unit, which is something with a kitchen, that's really big, you know.
Well, we don't have secondary dwelling units. That's our secondary dwelling unit ordinance became our ADU ordinance. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I was saying. If we have guest house, should we, and I'm fine with it being, it doesn't bother me what it's called, and I don't even mind merging a non-kitchen in with a bigger unit. I guess what I'm saying is I feel like we should have two very clear definitions of here's the state ADU, and here's everything that's not a primary residence and is not an ADU.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is under other code, you can build that thing now.
Yep.
So I don't think we need to deal with it. I think we just make the ADU code the ADU code.
Okay. And there won't be confusion with an applicant who comes in and says, I want to build this thing, and staff will explain to them, well, if it meets these parameters, we can call it an ADU, and we have this process, bang, and that's out the door. But if you want to build it, 1,250 square feet, then we're going down this road, and they see the difference.
Yeah.
And that might also incentivize them to follow the ADU.
Yeah, and, if we do the thing where we pre-approve, and not only can you go down this road, here's, 10 plans, you could just grab
Right.
one and build.
I agree.
Yeah.
Good to me.
Okay. Well, that was a good strategy thing. I guess the other thing I had about that, the second one was short-term rentals. I think middle of last term of the city council, they gave us the direction very passionately that we should do nothing to prevent any kind of short-term rentals at all. And I think they were making that point in direct juxtaposition of the third council ago, who had said just the opposite. And so, do we maybe want to solicit the answer to the short-term rental from city council? Because this one, as I recall, if memory serves, has bounced back and forth literally with the last two councils.
And the way I understand it, the way it's written in the second unit ordinance, the way I interpret it, is short-term rentals are prohibited within ADUs.
Yep.
30 days or less. The code is silent on everything else. Prior city attorney made an interpretation that since it's silent, they are assumed to be prohibited. We had a city manager make a different interpretation, saying that no, just because it's silent doesn't mean that they're prohibited, but they're actually allowed because we're silent in the code. I don't know.
That's my memory. That's my memory.
That sounds exact. Now that you bring that up, because
And it seems like we might, actually want to say what we want, but
I agree, because and the reason that I remember that now is because people had come up and asked at the counter, am I allowed to have this? And they said, there's nothing in the code that prohibits it. And then city attorney at the time came back and said, well, that doesn't mean that they can.
Right.
And we all kind of scratched our head, but.
I think this is similar to the idea of the fee structure. You're talking about the enforcement of the city's rules and regulations, and this is going to have to, this is the city council telling staff that you will enforce this rules and not other rules, and that's kind of outside of our wheelhouse. I don't think we have the authority to tell the building inspector, hey, tell those people they can't do that. We don't pay them, we don't set that policy. So on this, I would rather have it go back to the city council, and because it has changed in our lifetime more than once, and if they want to set the policy, that got set by them, and that's where it goes. And we don't get caught up in their emotional problems.
I think though.
Hey, no, really.
The one thing though is the one caveat to that is that I think the council should be aware of the arena game, because it's my understanding that the state wants these used as housing and not hotels. And so if our failure to prohibit the use of these as Airbnbs jeopardizes our application with HCD on the housing element, that's a problem.
I'd also add that I think, Planner Wolf can correct me, I think that this discussion was in the staff report that went before the city council. Am I right? It wasn't.
We did remove that.
We removed it, okay. Well, we removed it, so there's no direction from council on this point. But the municipal code, as it's written, and the last municipal code that was, so the ADU law, the second unit ordinance that we currently have was adopted in December 2019 and just wasn't enforced, right? Because the city council decided not to enforce in February. So, is that
But we can't take a vote and say enforce the law or don't enforce the law. That's outside of our.
You could recommend what it should be and provide a reason for the city council to help them make a determination. And I think it'd probably be to the city council's benefit to have your input regarding whether or not short-term rental should be allowed in the city and or why.
It seems like short-term rentals would cut into the number of ADUs we had, so I would recommend not personally, unless I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah, I agree, Peggy. I find them disruptive anyway, so I'm against it. If you want.
I don't want to have an opinion on it. I think that what I would like is guidance from city council as to what, I think that city attorney should provide them with the feedback as to what that could do, or building department, I don't know who the right person is, as to what it could do with regards to RENA numbers. I think that the feedback that I'm hearing is that the planning commission recommends direct code with regards to this. In other words, if the city council does not want to allow those, they should have us recommend code for it. If they do want them allowed, they should have us recommend code for that.
And you're speaking specifically to ADUs?
Specifically, well, I think all short-term rentals. But
I agree
yes, I'm
with you.
speaking specifically to ADUs because that's what we're talking about
we want to do this
right now.
code, right? I mean, the problem is we go into like enforcing all of short-term rentals and we get stuck in a quagmire and we never do anything. So
specifically
with ADUs, I agree entirely.
Specifically with ADUs, we should get direction from city council as to whether or not they want us to write code that says they're prohibited or they are allowed.
So, City Attorney, do you know why the discussion on short-term rentals was removed from the staff report?
Yeah, I remember we removed all these development/regulatory topics because we thought that this conversation should happen at the planning commission level first. But I understand Vice Chair Pevner's concern. If they don't want to have this conversation and they want city council direction first, I think that's fine. Maybe the best way to go about it then would be for the planning commission to address the remainder of the topics, and then the city staff can include what city staff thinks the short-term rentals issues are regarding short-term rentals. And by the time this makes it up to the city council, they can make a determination on the short-term rentals in addition to all the other recommendations you have.
Is it our plan to bounce ideas back up to the council and get feedback and bring it back, or is our charge to get an ordinance and bring it to them?
I think it'd probably be most efficient to send up a recommendation with an ordinance with a recommendation. I think that would be the most efficient way. If we're looking for more feedback before we take action, we can certainly do that. It's just going to take more time. August, city council's off,
Yeah.
and the September schedule's highly impacted.
I don't think this is, I mean, if our goal is to do an ordinance, it's not hard for us to write the ordinance that says it's prohibited or they're allowed, and put a bracket over that part and say, this is what it looks like if you want this is what it looks like if you want B.
And then city staff's report can go over the pros and cons of it. I think
Yeah.
that's great. We should just specifically include it in the ordinance.
And I have a thing in the back of my head that says that we once had a tax on short-term rentals in this town that was of a certain amount, and there was a certain incentive to find the people who did short-term rentals and tax them accordingly.
I don't know about a tax, but they should definitely get a business license.
Well, that's a state, I mean, it's the TOT, right? I mean, it's a statewide tax that every city collects for hotels. I would assume
I thought it was for
applies-
hotels.
It applies to Airbnb. I mean, one of the big things with Airbnb is they sort of skirt a lot of rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, the TUT generally doesn't apply to these short-term rentals because it's less than 30 days. So.
Okay.
But they should get a business license because they're definitely operating a business in the city.
Okay.
So then I think we answered the terminology, or we have consensus on the terminology idea. Short-term rentals, I think we've solved. Parking is next. One of the questions I had about parking, sorry, I took some notes here. It was mentioned that in canyon zones, parking is impacted. Does that, I thought the state ADU law was fairly clear that they just don't care and that we can't regulate parking in any zones.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Is that not the case, city attorney?
So we can prohibit ADUs if we can make sufficient findings. And those findings need to be based on health safety concerns. So if we can make a health safety concern argument that either ADU should be prohibited or certain aspects of the ADU should be prohibited within the canyon zone, I think we make it. And whatever ordinance the city council adopts will need to go to HCD for their review and approval. And HCD can make the determination whether that provision should stay based on the findings that this body makes.
And if you were a gambling man, which I know is completely against your nature, would you guess that they would approve something that just says in the canyon zone that you have to show sufficient parking in order to get a ministerial approval, or would you suggest that they would need address by address determination?
I think we'd need not that general and not that detailed, probably. We probably need findings showing how, parking, traffic is impacted up there, why traffic is, maybe something from the fire marshal saying why roads are narrow, it's difficult to navigate, it's a very high fire hazard severity zone. We'd have to have a certain number of findings to communicate to HCD that this is a serious issue and we're not trying to prohibit housing, we're just trying to keep our residents safe.
Chair Dennison, if I may, I'm hearing two different conversations going on between the city attorney and the commission. Commission, it sounds like it's asking about parking, and the city attorney is responding with prohibition of ADUs altogether in the canyon.
I meant it's both, actually. It could be ADUs in general, which I think would be very difficult to do. But with respect to certain aspects of the ADU, like parking, it would be easier to do.
Right. Yeah. I think we're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm comfortable.
So the question, though, is how many ADUs are we going to build in the canyon? Right? Because, I mean, you think about the ADU going in the backyard in the R1 lot.
They don't have a backyard.
There's just not so many spots to wedge in the ADU in the canyon. So if we add 3 ADUs in the canyon, is that going to materially impact the parking? And that it's worth all this hassle to go through these findings and play with HCD? I don't know. It just seems like, to me, the parking thing is just not worth it.
On the other hand, there are days when you can't get a fire engine down some streets in the canyon. And any street parking there is going to, even one car can make the difference between, good things happening and very bad things happening.
Yeah.
And I would, the fire chief and me would rather have us make a good faith effort to go to HCD and say, look, we have this area where, we're happy to, if they can get the car off the street, we're happy to, go with that. But if it's going to end up on the street, we don't, there's no place. And part of us, we're partly compromised because they should be painting a lot more curbs red in that area, and they have not, and they probably need to go back and do that. But even with the new ordinance on the high fire zone stuff, you're pulling people off that. But use that as the example, because the high fire zone starts at Grandview North in a lot of places. And but I definitely say the canyon area.
Yeah, but there's a lot of places north of Grandview that it would be really easy to put ADUs in that have sort of standard. If you go east of the Heflin property, that development, those are sort of standard sized lots.
Yeah.
You could put ADUs.
But the canyon ordinance, the canyon zone would be an appropriate stab, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think even the people that live up there might.
Yeah. No, I hear you. So I think what we're saying then is that waive parking everywhere except the canyon zone, and staff and council can look at what kind of health and safety findings we'd need to make to justify that.
We don't need to
decision.
require parking at all. That's something that the state law provides that the city may do.
Okay.
So, just so I'm clear, because I didn't understand that, we're saying no parking requirements anywhere except canyon zone, right?
Yeah.
And
You get- if
And,
you-
and to the extent we need some special findings to do it for the canyon, you figure that out. That's, I think, what we're saying.
City Attorney, please correct me if I'm mistaken, but just to require parking in the canyon zone, I don't believe we need to make findings for that. Is that correct?
Well, an ADU is entitled to 1 unit, right? I mean, not entitled. They have to allow for a single unit. But if they're going to convert a structure, then they don't have to provide that additional unit of parking. And I guess what we're saying is, you do have to allow for, even if you convert a structure, you will have to have at least 1 parking space available for that.
Off street,
Off street.
not at the curb.
Correct. We
'Cause
don't,
I have no doubt that down in the major part of the city, they're going to ask for forgiveness and put a car at the curb. I mean, I
And
think
we got
that's gonna
room.
be, I think that's gonna be the way, our way of our future. And most streets, I think, can somehow absorb that, but I don't think the canyon can.
So we would vary from the ADU standards in that one regard in the canyon zone for conversion of structures. I think conversion is the only situation, I think, in the canyon where we would want, where they lose the parking.
so conversions of existing structures to ADUs is already exempt by state law requirement.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't require parking anyway. But where a parking would be required is for the construction of a new ADU. That's not exempt under subdivision E of the state law. That would be an ADU that is greater than 800 square feet, that is 4 feet setback from the side and rear, and within 16 feet height. And in a case like that, that's where we would want to require parking specifically in the canyon, and we can do, and I don't think we need to make findings to that effect. Is that
Well,
correct, City Attorney?
I think we don't need to get that level of granularity at this meeting. I think you get where we're coming from. We want no parking requirements townwide except for the canyon, and to the extent we can, figure it out. Let's do what we can.
I think, yeah, it would need to be for conversion, because any new body with a car needs a place off-street in the canyon. It's a life safety issue. It's like really clear, so.
So, and the concern is heightened still by the potential impact of parking where conversions of carports and garages that can occur in the canyon, further impacting that parking of the primary residence.
Right.
So they'd have to account for the cars for both the primary and the conversion off-street to do an ADU.
We don't have to account that, that's all exempt.
Right. That's the problem.
So we need, we need to, what we need to do is require them to have on-site parking to make sure that they don't park on the street.
That's right, that's what I was saying.
Right.
We can draft that.
I think, yes, I think we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so
We're all
too.
pretty tired.
And then, height, I got, I think we liked the idea of 16 feet, right? But
We
I
have
did-
to,
I-
whether we like it or not.
Yeah. The second story I didn't understand. I thought that that there's no defined ADU that was 2 stories.
So here's what an ADU could possibly be today, under state law requirements, up to 22 feet from floor, from grade, natural grade to ridge. Because our height is defined by what you see as the dimension labeled 16 feet in the R1 zone.
Is the height rule of 1 story that we put in one of the issues that we had with the ordinance? I mean, what particularly was the thing that got us in trouble?
I don't think it really got us in trouble. Our limit currently was 15 feet.
But it was 15 feet or 1 story.
1 story, yes. The issue that would come up is if somebody wanted to, the older law was, if you were doing a garage conversion, or you wanted to put an ADU on top of an existing structure, you can do that up to 15 feet, if you can squeeze a second story into it. But according to the way our requirements, I think the reason why we came up with 15 feet you would not be able to do a second story. And the whole objective of that was for existing structures, especially garages, and we have many of them that are built at property line, it becomes an intrusion issue, privacy issue to the adjacent property owners.
Yeah.
But aren't ADUs, they have to conform to setbacks, right?
Now they do. Under the current state ordinance, they cannot be any closer than, well, for new construction, 4 feet side and rear. If you have a garage conversion and it's at less than 4 feet side or rear, we still have to allow that conversion.
But just a conversion, right? Not putting a unit on top of it.
Not putting a unit above.
Yeah.
So it has to fit within the existing
Right.
roof line that's already
But
there.
this you could build within 4 feet. And this is R1, right? Because this is the height game that's specific to R1.
That is correct.
So it's basically a loft.
And it's all because we measure from here.
Yep.
Yes.
And that's the
yes.
tail that wags the dog.
Yes.
So why don't we just say 15 or 16 feet and let it be done for ADUs?
Like this.
Like that.
We all agree that this is what.
Except what you're gonna get is, you're not gonna get the pitch roof. I
Well,
mean, the
the-
whole point of the thirdsies
You're gonna get it
game
flipped.
was because we wanted to encourage this kind of roof instead of flat roof.
Right.
And so if we do this, we're gonna get a lot of flat roof on our ADUs.
And
But they're gonna, but even at 16 feet, they can only have one floor.
not necessarily. They would have a flat roof
Yeah,
with the minimum height clearance
7.5.
of 7.5 feet.
Yeah.
Well, what about the other
You might be able to squeeze another,
half story
yeah.
for the kids?
It's a loft. It's, you know,
You could do a 2-story in a flat roof that's 16 feet tall. That's 7.5 feet.
So you have like a balcony inside your ADU
right. With a ladder that you climb up to.
for the kids. Yeah.
I don't know. To me, the issue of the R1 height measurement is a much bigger issue. And we've gone round and round in that I don't know how many times. I'm fine with just leaving it at 16 feet of the underlying zone. And if it means we get a couple examples of the one with the loft, that doesn't really give me heartburn. But I mean, if y'all want to go to this, that doesn't bother me either. I don't think this is really important either way. Because I think if you're doing a 750 square foot thing, you're not gonna, I mean, you're gonna have a missile silo if you try to build 2 stories. It's not much of a building. I guess you could, if you did the bigger one.
If I look at the impact on the community, though the taller one, I believe, is going to be up against the neighbors more than this one will.
Yeah.
And so for this, I look at it, how does it affect the guy next door?
Which was the third rule, so that you keep it more of a pitched roof. And it's harder to be imposing on your neighbors with this big flat wall if you have to have the pitched roof because of the third.
Does the
Yeah.
does the angle plane rule from R1 apply, or is it just 4 feet?
Right now, it's under state law. It is 4 feet. Although I'm not sure if we can apply an angle plane rule.
No, we can't apply it. We can apply it so long as it doesn't violate so long as we give them that 4 foot side and rear yard setback. There's no reason why we can't apply the angle plane rule. We can apply any additional regulation so long as we allow them the minimum under state law.
But does the 4 feet that they have to go straight up?
You go straight up.
So functionally, we can't do the angle plane.
Go straight up.
Because I was thinking the angle plane sort of solves the issue, but we can't.
Can we make sure that the free drawings that we hand out are? No, I
That's
mean,
why we do the free
That's why you
drawings.
do the free drawings.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way you steer the boat, you know?
And in this scenario, I think what would really occur, you're not gonna have a 7.5 foot ground floor, you're gonna have an 8 foot ground floor. And that means that roof pitch will have to become shallower.
Yeah, we're gonna get flat roofs if we do this, and The question is whether we think that's worse or the picture up above where you definitely are gonna wedge in a loft.
We can't enforce the angle plane, it's almost a moot point.
I still think that the 16-foot is going to be most palatable to the community, the neighbors, you know. Although it might be interesting to have some drawings for that angle plane just to see what 4 feet, where it cuts off.
So 4 foot at the setback, the top plate height would be 14 feet. So that's at the bottom of the bottom 1/3. So 14 feet up to this point here. If set back at 4 feet with the angle plane, it would reach this point up to 14 feet.
Okay. But you still could do, under the R1 rules, you could do a flat roof at 16 feet.
You could do a flat roof, so going to this slide, yes, you could do a flat roof at 16 feet, and you could very carefully fit in a 2-story structure there, where it may be like shipping containers, one on top of the other.
Oh, God.
Well, we already had a railroad car.
Yeah. I don't care.
I don't know that I have enough preference on this one.
Yeah, this is a complicated geometry problem, and I don't think we can solve it tonight, personally.
Yeah, I think the solution will be in the free drawings.
Should we study this further? Do we have direction?
I would say study it further and also look at what sort of free drawings or products that we want to consider pre-approving and make sure they fit within whatever limits we're putting up there.
Even if we have prescriptive plans, there's still the potential for some client to come in.
Yeah, you could still build it out. I think we.
Yeah, but I'm saying.
That throws it back into the fee schedule. Hint, hint.
We can.
These are cheaper.
Limits have to be in compliance with prescriptive plans, but it's sort of a give and take a little bit, you know. Yes, we don't want to say we just love this prescriptive plan, so we're going to let somebody, you know, build something really big because we want the limit set to that. It's sort of a give and take, you know, the products, the plans, and our, you know, parameters here. So it needs more study, is what I'm saying.
I think it would be interesting if we could, if we can go up to the upper one, if we can superimpose the 4 foot and the angle plane from R1 on here and see where it plays out.
Okay, so just demonstrate an angle plane.
Yeah, I mean, if you you know, put the 4 foot setback in, and then show us how that, if this weren't an ADU, how the angle plane would affect this. It would be useful to see how much of this is invading the angle plane, because that's sort of our gold standard. And if you look at it and it looks like it's all within the angle plane, then I'm okay with it. If it looks like tons of it is invading, then we need to rethink.
And can they put in a dormer? I mean, on the side that's not next to the property line? I mean, because if they could, I mean, if this is the property line, could they bump out a dormer on that? I mean, so, I mean, if not, my preference is for a smaller impact and a smaller structure. You know, but if they have the rights to put out a dormer and stuff like that, then that's going to incentivize expansion, which pushes me back to the first one, which is smaller.
That is a good question. I don't have the answer immediately.
It's okay.
It seems like we're trying to encourage the pitched roofs. Why don't we just limit the plate height?
Yeah, the plate height, I guess, is gonna.
Plate height, then, you know, within also a reasonable top height, but, you know.
But the issue is, if state law says the 16 feet is what we can limit, and we say plate height is 12 feet, are we gonna be in trouble?
Yeah, I think if we define it by plate height, we'd have to say 16 feet, which could cause more unintended.
Yeah.
More flat roofs.
All right.
Anybody wanna?
My next question was on tree ordinances. I guess I didn't understand, were you saying that we can't do anything about our tree ordinance when it comes to ADUs?
The whole idea is to make applicants aware of our tree preservation ordinance, because a lot of the times they'll come in with a plan and say, I want to do this ADU in my backyard. And we say, okay, could you please define where your trees are and identify any that are protected? And they come back right away, well, oh, I didn't know that there was protected trees in our city. And then it caused a problem for them. So it's more about awareness of the city's ordinance for that.
But if they want to put the ADU on top of an oak tree, they can do that, right? No?
No, we're saying they can't. It's not clear under state law. But I know that some of our other clients have had conversations with HCD about it. And HCD is sensitive to the environmental issues involved with that. And they've generally sided with the city in allowing for us to enforce our tree ordinance. So I think we should.
So if they want to build that and it's going to impact protected trees, the staff decides as a ministerial decision whether to allow that? And what are the criteria that staff uses to decide if that's an oak tree that can go versus one that has to stay?
So when someone
require an arborist report.
And that goes back to my recommendation that we have the right arborists on a list, because otherwise we're gonna go down to that guy that said, yeah, we can cut down take out the roots of the tree at the base.
Yeah, we could build a swimming pool under the oak tree.
I'm still not over him, so, so, you know, we have a list of arborists who will give us good information to make a decision. So if it can be ministerial, but it should be ministerial and by someone who we have established has credibility.
Yeah, and I think the way we've done the historic program has proven to be not only more objective and reasonable, but cheaper for applicants. And I think that's a great combo.
Do we have a list of arborists that we work with, Director Gonzalez?
We don't.
Do you have arborists in mind?
We had a report from the last design review where the applicant was made very aware of the importance of the roots and came to us with a rather detailed plan about how he's going to protect the trees. And to me, that spoke of some kind of focus on the health of the trees and the impact that construction does on them. So someone who can provide us with that level of specificity and concern is someone I want, because we had that other guy who was clearly working for the client, and I'm not sure the tree got the right end of the deal.
So are we saying we want to recommend the tree preservation ordinance?
But who does the city makes a decision now, yes? And who do they use?
Whoever they hire. We don't regulate who.
Yeah, but can't we do the same thing we did with historic preservation, where the city hires
We can
a
sole
programmatic, there you go, sole source, that's what we call it. That would be great. We do an RFP for who we want to use, pick a good one.
We used to have a tree commission of people who were, this was their profession, and they were all over it.
Yeah, but we couldn't send an ADU to them, right, because it's ministerial.
I don't know.
Wouldn't be able to.
So then the idea of the report would be to generate mitigation if they were to either remove or trim the tree significantly. That would be objective and non-discretionary, so that we could probably do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And if you go forward one more slide.
Yeah, I don't understand this one.
So to explain this, if someone wants to develop an ADU that is attached to their structure that is older than 75 years of age, this ordinance, code section 1760-056, which is our discretionary demolition permit process, says that it would be required approval of a discretionary demolition permit, which is a discretionary action, which we cannot do because it conflicts with what an ADU would be.
So if I want to put my ADU on top of my historic structure, I don't have to ask for permission, I can just do it.
Well, the conflict arises with the state requirement that it be ministerial.
That doesn't apply to houses that are actually on the historic list, does it?
That's correct. So if they're a historical landmark, it's a different case. We're talking about potential historic preservation of properties that may or may not be eligible for listing as a historic landmark.
So we have a house that's not on the historic list, more than 75 years old. Normally, we would get one of those pre-reviews and figure out if it's a big deal.
Right.
Currently, that pre-review process is part of the discretionary demolition permit process.
Why can't we do that?
It's expensive, and they're trying to cut it off.
That is what is sole source currently. It is a lot less expensive than it used to be. It's $1,200 today. And it does generate a report that is objective. It'll either identify that the property is eligible for listing or not eligible. However, even if it comes back that it's eligible, then we would still be required to go under a discretionary demolition permit process, which is discretionary and conflicts with ministerial action of ADUs.
But if we have a finding that it's historic, do we have an ability to go outside the ADU law on the ministerial?
I think state law only provides that exemption if it's within a historic district, for which the city of Sierra Madre does not have any.
I mean, if state law says we have to allow it, we're not doing any good.
But I guess
It just seems wrong to me, though.
I thought ADUs were very narrowly designed or defined and wouldn't occur except, over a garage? Or the conversion of a garage?
It can be attached to a house as well.
That's the junior ADU, isn't it?
It can be a regular ADU, as long as it's up to 50% of the size of the house.
But imagine if you had a house that's, not on the historic list, but should be considered historic. It's got a really big setback. So you got room to stick in an ADU in the front, and you do a JADU where you tear off the front facade and build the thing in.
Yeah.
And that's ministerial. That seems
Yeah,
horrible.
that's what I was worried about, because it sounds like somebody can then take out a historical structure by saying, oh, I'm building an ADU.
Yeah.
And I think, unlike the environmental issue, I think HCD doesn't like these historic designations, because I think HCD believes that some cities are trying to game the system. We don't really have that here so much, I think. But in other cities, they've designated entire parts of the city as a historic district. Like blocks and blocks and blocks of homes that cannot be, they're claiming you can't build ADUs on because it's historic. And when people play games like that, HCD tries to crack down on it.
Yeah. No, I get that. It just seems like we're caught in the bind.
But it sounds like what you're saying is if we designated the entire city a historical zone, that then we would be in compliance with HCD.
No, we wouldn't, because and again, I think let me know if I'm wrong, Josh, but it's if it's a state designated historic site, then it's protected. Our local historic designations likely won't hold water.
So even if suppose we waived the fee for the investigation as to the historical nature of the house, and it comes back to us and says, yes, this house has some historical value, and we would normally then do what we could to preserve it as opposed to modify it. But they can just say, well, I don't care, I'm gonna put this stucco thing in the front of the house or something like that?
Do we know what the process is for state designation of historical sites? Is there like some kind of application process for the city that
Right.
would,
And most of our properties would not qualify. I think we only have 2 state.
Yeah, we're 1 or 2 federals and
I
1 or 2
think the
states.
500 Mariposa, that mid-century modern down the street.
Oh, good.
The Ascension Church, and I think 287 East Montecito was eligible.
It is eligible for listing as within a historic district on a national level. It's also eligible for listing on a local level, of course. But we did have a recent ADU conversion on a landmark It was just a conversion of its garage, and I believe we had the certificate of appropriateness come before the commission some time ago for that project.
So it sounds like what we've got is the ability to do some review, additional review for things that are on the historic list where we do a certificate of appropriateness. And for everything else, we're
out of luck.
yeah.
So, and we're about to have a lot of houses that hit 75.
Yeah, so that's,
Singing this for years.
Yeah, and so,
yeah.
so,
that-
so our artificial rule of 75 years old is about to become more and more impacted by people who want to put in an ADU. And while we haven't done a good survey of all houses that could be historical, so we could do a over the counter yes and no, we've asked them to have it investigated and get back to us.
Wild.
And so we're
It's largely not an incentive for ADUs development. When we tell someone property is older than 75 years of age, you need a historic report, it's always met with a sigh and, oh, I didn't know that.
But still, I mean, the thing is if we could do something about it, I would say if we have a pot of money, let's subsidize that report.
yeah, that's what I was going to go.
But if the report comes out and it doesn't matter what the report says, we're going to approve it, then I don't know why it makes any difference. We should just approve the thing because state law says we have to.
Well, can we exercise a little bit of judgment? I mean, you can just look at some places and know that you don't need to buy the report.
Do we have any leeway in this? Is this just a moot point?
May I recommend that we change the threshold at 75 years of age to something more appropriate, seeing as all of these post-war developments are coming into play by this ordinance? Is
Well,
that
but
maybe a possibility?
That doesn't affect the outcome if we don't have any say over it.
Yeah, we put it at 100 years, so we narrow the number down of houses that we cry that people put aluminum siding ADUs in front of. It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter because we can't stop them, right? I mean, unless I'm not hearing you right.
Yeah, I don't think we have a lot of say in this. I mean, I think it's too bad because but I don't think we don't have any leverage in this.
Mr. City Attorney, can you do some research with some of the other cities that you have to this? Because we can't be the first city that's unhappy about having 100-year-old houses that are going to get ripped out on the front and stucco put up.
Especially because we're not talking about zoning the whole city as a historic district to get around ADU laws. We want to encourage ADUs. We just don't want them to be a measure of abuse.
I can provide a survey of what other cities have done and how they've responded to this.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that the last one?
We made it in a half hour to spare.
All right.
So I don't want to keep the commission if they don't feel that they want to, but we also have that I brought up outside of this presentation was the front yard setback issue that we've been hearing from the community on ADUs in the front of a primary dwelling behind the front yard setback.
What's
Like
our-
on Grandview?
I thought that we didn't have any say over that. As long as it complies with the setbacks, do we have say over, is there an exemption from ministerial review if it's in front of your primary residence versus behind it?
State law does not have any requirement of front yard setbacks, and it defers to underlying zone. So, City Attorney, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we can establish a front yard setback provision in our our ADU ordinance.
Right, I mean, we won't review it, but if we can establish some objective standard for a front yard setback, we can apply it.
A front yard setback that's different than the front yard setback otherwise applicable?
What's the current front yard setback?
25 feet or
25
prevailing
feet.
setback.
Or prevailing?
So you mean we'd like say it's 50 feet for ADUs? Something like that. So they would force it to the back? That seems like something if we did HCD would not be happy with.
But we also do that thing where we look at all the houses on the cul-de-sac or on the street, and we do the average number. We throw out the top and with that.
Prevailing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
prevailing.
So even having
And-
calculated that, there have been some ADUs in the front of a primary dwelling.
So the idea is, and then somebody comes to us and say, we want to build this ADU, and you do that calculation, say, well, you've encroached on what the prevailing setback is. And then do we have the right to say, then you can't build it?
Well, we would determine that front yard setback, that the prevailing setback would be, so let's say it's 40 feet. As long as they have space between that 40 feet setback and the front of their primary dwelling to build an ADU, we can't say no.
Okay, well, I could live with that. I think that, like, if you look at the one on Grandview, they're right out to the property line on the front. I mean, and it's also a rather large ADU.
May I speak specifically about that?
Yes.
So that ADU was permitted. The front encroachment you see is for a front porch that is permitted to project 6 feet into the front yard pursuant to our zoning code. I think it's under 1748 development standards.
But if you continue down Grandview, there are other houses that are in that same angle plane, or that same plane as the ADU. So it doesn't, while it is unique in its presence, it is not unique in its relationship to the street. Whereas if you had another set of houses that all of which were set back 50 feet, and the one where the house is in the front, that would, I think that would mess with the swing fei of the community or something. I don't know, but
that's
it would
why we
stick
got
out.
the prevailing.
Yeah. So I would use prevailing.
Yeah.
So we do have that, and we've explained to the community who has had some concerns about that. They still have concerns about why an ADU be permitted in the front of a structure and not be restricted to just behind the primary structure.
Well, it seems like the answer is because the state law told us they could.
I mean, how do we?
Poke the bear.
Poke.
Tell them it's 50 feet. Make it a separate setback and let them come back and disagree with us. That's the only way to do it. You know, if you don't push back,
Well,
they'll just think you're.
There's still lots in this, like, west of your house, there's one little house way at the back of the property.
Yes.
And if they put a second unit in front that lined up with all the other houses on Grandview, you wouldn't notice it.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if you got a little house away in the back, you could make that the ADU and put a bigger house.
That's why I told her she should build the big house in the front and
Yeah.
use hers as an ADU.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't think this one is a fight worth doing.
And to be honest, on that one on Grandview, I was appalled when I saw it being built, but it's done in the style of the house, and it actually isn't offensive to me now that it's all done.
Yeah, a lot of times they look
Yeah.
nastier when they're
Yeah.
just framed.
Just a little unusual.
I think if we're done with this one issue we should talk about though that pertains to ADUs is the floor area. Because in the ADU code, we say the floor area for all of the buildings has to be within what's required. But there's been some interpretations that we can't apply that, we can't, how's it go? We can't say no to an ADU if it goes above that. And so effectively what we're doing is we're saying we have a floor area rule and you can build an ADU on top of that. And I think that whether there's an ambiguity or clarity there, what we should do is change our floor area rules to say, this is the floor area for everything but the ADU, and then you can build an ADU this size. Because otherwise we're gonna get this where we're gonna say, you know, you can build 3,500 square feet, they're gonna build out everything else, and then they're gonna come back with an ADU and build a, 1,200 foot ADU, and we're gonna run up against some rule that state law says, oh, now we can't apply
Control it.
that. And it'd be better just to shrink everything, assuming people are gonna build ADUs. And also, it's gonna incent people to build ADUs if they wanna maximize their floor area.
So just to point out there are exemptions under state law of ADUs up to 800 square feet if they are set back 4 feet from side and rear and are up to 16 feet in height. They can be permitted regardless of the city's requirements for floor area, open space, or lot coverage.
So why is it that they do some things at 750 and some at 800? Why can't they just?
To make it more confusing for us.
Okay. So basically, I think what we should do is sort of just figure out what our FAR is and shrink it by 800 feet then.
Because that's our future.
No, yeah, it's exactly our future. And so the question is, do you want just as big a house as we've decided as a community is okay to build, plus 800 feet? Or do you want the total to be as big as what we've decided as a community is the right size to build? And to me, I'd rather have the second.
But Commissioner, I think that would probably be outside the scope of what council directed. If we.
Well, I entirely agree with that. But I think that it's something we should point out to council, that this is a big issue.
We don't have, I think that the same way that it would be staff's job to let the council know about the hazards of short-term rentals, at the same point can be made about this. We see coming down the pike that because of the state laws, if we allow that, like, that's what it means today, unless we adjust it down. And then the council can say, yes, make a policy about it, or no, not yet.
Yep, and I think this is, it's sad that we had a big crowd earlier and that everyone's gone now, but I think the idea that we're just gonna allow 800 square feet more floor area on every lot in town is a big deal. And it's not something that's, I agree with you, it's not within the wheelhouse of this code, but it's something we should make council aware of and the town aware of to decide if we're cool with that, because.
That's an extra one-car garage on every property.
Bigger.
It's bigger than a one-car garage.
Two-car garage is 400, right? So it's a 4-car garage.
Yeah.
So to me, it makes sense to shrink the numbers down and then say effectively 800. And we're not going to be able to do that exactly because on some small lots you can't just whack out 800 square feet. But overall we could get rough equivalents.
Sounds good to me.
So if I can come back to city council with this, I'm hearing from our commission, and please correct me if I'm mistaken, that the general goal of this ordinance update is to make it easy. Would that be a correct and fair statement?
Yeah, I'd say, yes, I'd say so.
Did you say go back to the city council? Because the ordinance would have to come back to the planning commission.
Well, I do want to come back to city council for what planning commission had directed on information and additional, I guess, maybe worth back and forth communication still.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Well,
if you have enough to go on, Josh.
I think that he said city council, but he meant planning commission when you first started.
The planning commission wants it to be easy.
Yes.
And maybe Councilmember Parker can help me out on this, is that the council also wants development of ADUs to be easy for the community.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, so under the operative general goal that we're trying to make it easy.
So I think the next step is let's do a code revision. And for the issue of short-term rentals or anything else that we feel like we need to punt, let's draft alternatives.
Yep.
So that we can push that up to the city council, and instead of giving them ambiguous stuff, we could say, look,
A or B.
Here's A, here's B. It's ready to go either way you want.
And staff recommends one or the other because they've done their research.
So next step would be a draft ordinance for the planning commission review.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. You have enough there, Josh?
I'm getting a little bit tired.
I'm sorry, yeah, I don't blame you. We'll move on. All right. That's enough discussion. I guess we'll just move on to planning commission reports then. Anybody have anything to announce? No? Okay, great. And planning and community preservation report, department reports? Any Anything for us, Vince?
Just, we do have two projects that the commission is going to be reviewing on August 19th, and possibly, maybe or maybe not, bringing back revisions for an ADU ordinance. I would imagine not. I would imagine I'd push that off.
Oh, we weren't meeting on August 19th.
No, we're still meeting in August.
Okay.
Yeah.
I may not be.
Okay.
All right. That's it. Very good. Then we'll adjourn the meeting to August 19th. Thank you.
It's a short one.
Is that a record?
No.